All right, we should be ready to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, this is Ward 5 Councilmember Kenya McDuffie here and Chair of the Council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. We recessed our oversight hearing earlier, and we are going to reconvene the hearing now. The time is 2:55 p.m. and we're reconvening this oversight hearing, and we're going to begin with the government witnesses for the agencies that we are going to be hearing from today. And those agencies include the Public Service Commission, the Office of People's Counsel, Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, and the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration. We're going to begin with the Chair of the Public Service Commission, Emil Thompson. Just as a reminder to folks, the Public Service Commission has a mission that is to serve the public's interest by ensuring that financially healthy electric, natural gas, and telecommunications companies provide safe, reliable, and quality utility services at reasonable rates for district residential, business, and government customers. And I want to note for the record that Ward 2 Council member and member of the committee, Brooke Pinto, is also with us. And I'm going to turn now to Chair of the Public Service Commission, Emil Thompson, to allow you to offer any public statement testimony that you have. And good afternoon to you. Thank you for your patience. I know you were on earlier, Chairman Thompson, when all the public witnesses were testifying with respect to the Public Service Commission. So I'll turn to you now and give you time to make your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman McDuffie, and no needs for apologies. But thank you, and welcome to Councilmember Brooke Pinto as well. I am Emil Thompson, Interim Chairman of the Public Service Commission. I have provided written testimony that I will summarize for you today. I want to depart from the usual practice of giving you an overview of the last year and instead discuss two overarching principles and how those principles provide the blueprint to how we will achieve our commitments under the Clean Energy Act. The first principle concerns our efforts to reduce greenhouse gas and other harmful emissions. The second involves efforts to modernize the electric and gas distribution grids. These two principles overlap and are interrelated. We cannot expand the use of renewables if the grid is not equipped to adapt to multiple distributed energy resources, including solar energy facilities. We must also ensure that the grid maintains a superior level of reliability and resiliency while simultaneously considering affordability. First, lower emissions. We can lower emissions by converting to non-fossil fuel energy sources where appropriate. Our RPS program is a highly successful step in that direction. As of the end of 2021, there were over 10,000 solar projects within the district and 2,900 projects outside the district. In 2021 alone, we certified over 2,000 new RPS solar facilities within the district, including 82 new community renewable energy facilities, CREFs. This represents total RPS certified solar capacity of 192 megawatts, exceeding the solar carve-out estimated goal for the first time. We recognize that the continued success of our RPS program depends on solar customers being able to interconnect with the electrical distribution system. On January 28th, we issued a notice of proposed rulemaking that will permit $1 million of cost-sharing subsidies to help pay for system upgrades necessary to interconnect solar systems with the electric grid. Earlier, we had undertaken a similar cost-sharing approach to promote new CREFs in the district. We understand that interconnection issues must be resolved to continue to promote renewable facilities. In that vein, we are planning a roundtable style public hearing on interconnection to be held in early summer. We will invite local and regional players to share their insights on making the interconnection process more efficient, transparent, and less expensive. Another example of our efforts to lower greenhouse gas emissions is case number GD 2019-04, our framework for considering the climate effects of utility proposals under the Clean Energy Act. We convened a work group to recommend metrics, reporting requirements, and benefit cost analysis frameworks. The work was arduous, but on November 16, 2021, the working group filed its lengthy report. There was a majority agreement on what metrics to use, including quantifying carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, and benefit cost analyses of utility programs. We intend to act on the working group's recommendations shortly. Another example of the interconnected nature of our cases is PEPCO rate case FC 1156, which also considered metrics aimed at lowering emissions, not a traditional concern of rate cases. In June of 2021, the Commission approved an enhanced multi-year rate plan filed by PEPCO. In addition to approving some of PEPCO's request for rate increases, the Commission also adopted climate and energy tracking performance incentive mechanisms, PIMs, to encourage PEPCO to contribute to the district's clean energy commitments. Perhaps the most important of our cases to ensure that we meet our Clean Energy Act commitments is FC 1167, the Climate Business Plan case. In this case, opened in November of 2020, the Commission commenced a climate policy proceeding to consider whether and to what extent utilities or energy companies are meeting and advancing the district's energy and climate goals. The Commission will take action where necessary to guide the companies in the right direction. Both AltaGas and PEPCO have filed climate plans. We've received numerous comments, briefs, and additional studies have been submitted in this case. We plan to act on those determinations in the second half of 2022. That's just a few of our cases where we're focusing on lowering emissions. In terms of modernizing the grid, the most far-reaching of our efforts to modernize the grid is known as PowerPath DC. We have held numerous technical workshops and town hall meetings, issued a detailed staff report outlining the Commission's jurisdiction, identifying regulatory barriers to grid modernization, and providing a framework for the subsequent phases of the case. We have also approved the formation of working groups, including one to identify DER pilot projects for grid modernization. Most recently, we have focused on these pilot projects with the assistance of a governance board consisting of interested stakeholders. We intend to use the $21.55 million from the Pilot Project Merger Fund, which was created as a result of the PEPCO-Exelon merger. This fund was designed to support the DER pilot projects and related to energy delivery system modernization. The governance board is currently reviewing an RFP for a community heat pump pilot project. We expect to act on that RFP and others this year. Another critical case regarding the modernization of the grid is FC 1144, the Capital Grid Project. The Capital Grid Project will increase the electric distribution system's reliability and resiliency and help prepare the city for extreme weather events anticipated with climate change. The project will help modernize the district's electric distribution system by increasing network transmission capacity and providing about 70 megawatts of additional hosting capacity for future DERs. Construction of the Capital Grid Project began in 2020 and is expected to be complete by 2027. The Commission monitors construction activities and oversees PEPCO's plan for consumer communications. Also, the Commission recently approved the latest and final phase of PEPCO's DC Plug program to improve electric service reliability and reduce the impact of storm-related outages in the district by placing vulnerable overhead distribution lines underground in wards 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8. This modernization program is another example of our efforts to protect against extreme weather events caused by climate change. Finally, a program that marries grid modernization and lowering gas emissions is Project Pipes. This is a 40-year accelerated pipeline replacement program to modernize a 1,200-mile natural gas distribution system in the district and enhance overall system resiliency, reliability, and safety for nearly 165,000 gas customers. This program also helps the district meet its climate goals by reducing potential leaks and methane gas emissions on the distribution system. I have tried today to show how two principles, lowering emissions and modernizing the grid, guide the Commission in its actions. We see adherence to those policies as the most effective way for the Commission to contribute to the district's climate commitments while also maintaining a reliable, safe, and affordable energy delivery system. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
And thank you for your testimony this afternoon. I do have some questions that I want to ask. And I alluded earlier to mention that I believe you were on the hearing, albeit not as a panelist, when we heard from the public witnesses who testified about the performance of PSC. And it was, I guess, maybe less about PSC and more about a request that the council mandate the PSC do more to address the challenges with gas leaks that these witnesses say are prevalent and frankly are captured in a report that they mentioned beyond Gas DC. It was a report that was released, at least stated today. It talks about a number of neighborhood researchers who use use devices to monitor and measure methane gas leaks in neighborhoods across the District of Columbia. Are you familiar? I don't know if you had a chance to review the report, but are you familiar with some of the testimony that was received by the committee earlier from a number of witnesses?
Yes, I did have the privilege of being able to hear all the witnesses from this morning.
Right, and notwithstanding the testimony you just gave, and I appreciate how you really focused that testimony and on some of these challenges. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of what you heard from those witnesses who talked about the gas leaks and that the fact that they're saying that PSC doesn't have the authority or at least is not pursuing a mandate to encourage the gas utility to transition off of gas. How do you respond to that?
Yes, well, I will give you a few statements in response to that. First, they are correct in that the power of the PSC right now, we do not have the power to disenfranchise Washington Gas. The power that we do have is through our case FC 1167, which I mentioned briefly in the testimony, which is our climate business plan case. And I think in many ways, it gets to what a lot of the people talked about today in terms of making sure that Washington Gas has a viable plan to ensure that they are a partner in us meeting the district's clean energy commitments of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so in that proceeding, we've asked for 5 and 30-year plans, which Washington Gas and PEPCO have submitted. And we, as I said, we've had several comments with respect to those plans, but we're also in the process of hiring a consultant to look at the feasibility of these plans to see if what's being suggested is really implementable and really doing a deep dive on this. The commission, this will be an iterative process. The commission will work to continue to drive Washington Gas towards the district's clean energy commitments. But one thing I will note is that as we're on this process, we have to make sure that the gas system that we have currently is safe, reliable, and resilient. And when we start talking about safety, the first thing that comes to mind is gas leaks. And so part of an accelerated pipe replacement program is going into the ground and replacing those pipes. Now, I heard a lot of figures that were thrown around this morning in terms of the cost. What I will tell you right now is the commission has only approved $300 million. And I say only, but people were saying $4 billion and $5 billion earlier. The commission has approved $300 million thus far for WGL to replace the pipes in the ground. And after each phase of project pipes, we have various audits to ensure that this is done correctly in a cost-effective manner and the right pipes are being replaced. And so this is something that the commission takes very seriously, our charge to shepherd the clean energy goals in the district, and we will do everything we can to continue to do that.
Thank you for that response. And I know you and your team provided the committee with several responses to pre-hearing questions that we provided to you all. And one of those questions, we talked about some of the information that you all collect. And it's my understanding from your responses that PSC collects information by ward about the reliability of electric distribution facilities, gas leaks, and pipeline safety. Do you all use this data or make it available for use by the applicable agencies or to prioritize modernization projects? How do you all use the data that you collect in that respect?
Yes. So some of the gas leak information is public, and there is some of it that is in fact private. We do use that to inform our decision-making process. What I will say is, I believe in 2020 alone, and I actually have some of the numbers in front of me. Our individual team, and this is outside of inspections that Washington Gas does, but our individual Office of Compliance and Enforcement did over 230 gas line safety inspections. We did 540 damage prevention inspections, and we also did 115 meter test inspections that were requested by customers. And so one of the things I will say is that PSC is very active, and even during the pandemic, and getting out into the field to making sure that the equipment is safe and that when residents have issues that we are there to respond. But going back to your original question, we definitely use this information. In fact, one of the PIMs one of the tracking PIMs in the PEPCO multi-year rate program gets down to even a more granular look in terms of looking at neighborhoods in terms of reliability, because the reliability as a whole in the city has really gone up over the past few years. We have top decile performance, but we still have pockets that don't have the same type of quality that other parts of the city do. And so what we're doing now is really drilling down. So the short answer is the ward information is very important for us, and it helps us make very informed and targeted decisions in approving requests by PEPCO and Washington Gas.
Okay. I sort of started off because I wanted to talk about some of the things the theme that came out of the public witness testimony, but I'm running low on time. Let me just ask, because I've been asking my agencies to talk about how your workers are doing. What's morale like within the Public Service Commission? How are people responding at this point in the pandemic? Give me just a sense, if you could briefly, before I turn to my colleague, Brooke Pinto.
Yes. Well, I will speak very briefly, especially as an employee who started during the pandemic. I would say that employee morale is high. We have a relatively small agency of about 70 to 80 employees, and there's a real sense of camaraderie. We also have a number of things that we do internally to check on people and talk with them. I know I personally have had numerous meet and greets with different groups of the agency. We're outwardly facing. We are still able to do outreach, of course, not to the same level we did before, but we've had virtual seminars with the community. As I mentioned before, we had our compliance teams have been able to go out in the field and do inspections. And so I would say that our commission is doing well. We do everything we can to support our employees, and we'll continue to operate in that manner.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Brooke Pinto, for a round. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman McDuffie. And hello, Chair Thompson. Nice to see you again. And thank you for your testimony. I appreciate the way you kind of framed mission of the Public Service Commission. And one of the things that we spoke about during your confirmation hearing a few months ago was about the importance of being objective and your plan to surround yourself with experts. So I'm curious, looking back for the last 6 months, how has it been going? How have you been surrounding yourself with experts or maintaining objectivity? And which protocols have you found to be most helpful in achieving those goals?
Yes. Well, I will say that in terms of surrounding myself with experts, one, the staff here at the PSC is second to none. When I go into national conferences, people know the staff, and it's evident from former chairman going to the FERC, right? That's a highly qualified position, and it's a testament to the talent and the depth of the bench here at the PSC. And so not only have I had the internal help, which has been great, but I've also been able to rely on commissioners across the nation. I've taken continuing educational classes through Stanford. to learn and stay abreast of the latest technologies. And so I would say the last, I guess, almost a year now, I've been a sponge. I've been soaking up everything I can and learning everything I can, listening to people in the community. I won't say I meet regularly, but I've had a number of meetings with individuals, some of the activists that we heard from today, because I want to hear those point of views that are different than maybe what I hear all the time. Because I think that's how we get to the answer. I don't think any one person has the answer. And if somebody had the answer, we would have done this already, right? And so being able to listen and being able to have that open ear has been, to me, very critical.
Thank you for that. And what processes do you have in place to communicate with local ratepayers about their needs?
So, of course, there is the Office of the People's Counsel, right, who is regularly and does a very good job at advocating on behalf of the ratepayers. But we also have we have an Office of Consumer Affairs here at the office that takes complaints, and we listen. And a lot of times, either we will pass them on to OPC, or we will investigate those matters ourselves. We have a complaint process, and then sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, I myself will have meetings with different people in the community so that I can hear what's going on. And so those are just some of the ways that we take in ratepayer input.
Right. I'm glad that you were able to hear the public testimony this morning, where we heard over and over again the call for the Public Service Commission to be more proactive in moving away from methane gas and in other efforts to achieve our city's really bold climate energy goals. And I know this has been a conversation that we had part of your confirmation hearing, but what sort of trends are you seeing with the PSC's work to achieve our climate change goals?
Yeah, so I will split that, even though it's intertwined, I'm gonna kind of split that on two different tracks. First, I'll talk about the first goal, 2032, all electricity will come from renewable sources. What I have seen, even though it's oftentimes much maligned, what I've seen is a steadily improving interconnection process. In this process, we have about 10,000 solar facilities in the district and about 219 CREFs. Well, in the last year, we certified over 2,000. So that's a huge increase. And then just in this first month, I just got these numbers the other day, the first month of calendar year 2022, so January, we had over 300 solar facilities certified, and I believe 13 CREFs. So if you extrapolate those numbers out across the year, that would be 3,600. That'd be over 3,600 solar facilities. So what you're seeing is that process, people are interconnecting more and more every year. And we had the rulemaking last year, which helped facilitate a cost sharing with CREFs to make that process more affordable for developers, which in turn makes it more affordable for the people who benefit from CREFs, which are primarily our Solar for All recipients or participants. And then we put out a NOPR a few weeks ago implementing or proposing a similar cost sharing strategy for the individual homeowners who want to put residential solar power on their house. And so those are some things that we've seen. I know when I go around the country and tell people these things, they're like, "Oh wow, this is huge." You know, I was at a conference last week speaking about interconnection, and I can tell you that compared to some of our colleagues, we are in a much better position. On the gas side, what I would say is, Project Pipes is one of the big things in terms of lowering emissions. There's also a pilot that Washington Gas is doing with the Environmental Defense Fund, looking at advanced leak detection. Again, looking at how we can look at our pipes and see which ones need to be replaced to cut down on emissions from the gas pipes. We've also directed Washington Gas to file energy efficiency program. And so that's in the works. And so there are a number of programs and projects that we have that are going to get us to where we need to go. And if we don't see a plan that is that has real feasible or lacks actual implementation, then we have no problem calling Washington Gas to the mat and saying, look, this isn't going to work.
Okay. Well, I'm out of time for this round, but next round we could talk about moving forward and any other needed investments to achieve some of those goals. Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, other Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. I also typically ask about racial equity, and I know you all had an opportunity to provide some pre-hearing responses, and so I won't ask every single question that I posed previously, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about and perhaps give an update on the Advisory Council on Utility Supplier and Workforce Diversity. Existence of any MOUs, some of the work that's happening in that respect. I'd love to hear if you have any specific examples you want to share in terms of how you all are approaching this work and meeting any of the goals that you've laid out for it. Okay,
no, that's a great question. So with respect to our MOU, we have a voluntary MOU with the utilities we regulate, so Verizon, Washington Gas, and Pepco, and also DC Water, who we don't regulate, but is a very willing partner, to encourage them to spend 25% on diverse or district-based businesses. This was championed by our former chairman, Chairman Phillips, and what we plan to actually have this summer is our first meeting where they will, each of these utilities will come before us and talk about their progress in terms of meeting those goals, what their actual spend has been, what efforts they've made, and so we're really looking forward to that. I would also note that in 2021 we had two webinars in which we reached out to the public to encourage diverse and district-based businesses to spend with the commission directly. And then we recently also hired or appointed our first racial equity officer. And so we are very excited about all these initiatives. The racial equity officer, she actually is in the chairman's office because we thought this was a very important job. And so we look forward to really getting that off the ground and starting some programs around that as well.
Thank you for that. And I know that Chairman Phillips started that work before the pandemic set in, and I know there have been a lot of efforts with corporations and companies to do more in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion following the tragic killing of George Floyd and others, and the very public protests and calls for racial justice and economic justice. But making sure that whatever efforts are underway with utilities are sustainable and something that's designed to be long-term is something that I would be interested in. And so to the extent you can share anything now or as a follow-up after the hearing, I would love to hear, sort of whether you believe these things are being put in place in a way that make them sustainable long-term, rather than, unless it's something that's specifically designed as a pilot or something temporary, but understanding that this is a commitment that will extend beyond this moment where we are during the pandemic. I think it's going to be important. You all have some CBE goals yourselves, I believe, and so talk to me about how you did on those goals for fiscal year 2021. What was the goal? Where did you end up? And what's the goal for fiscal year 2022, and how are you doing thus far?
Yes. So what I will say is, and I'm just going to give a little bit of history here. In 2020, our goal was just under $700,000 SBE spend, and we spent $941,000. So we exceeded our goal in 2020. In 2021, our goal almost doubled to $1.3 million. And we did not hit that goal. We spent $1.1 million. It's my understanding that because of supply chain issues and some other delays. A number of projects, the number of deliveries we expected to take receipt of in 2020 did not occur, and they will be coming into 2022. Our goal for 2022 is just over $1 million, so less than our 2021 goal. And what I can say is we already have obligated through this first quarter $500,000. And so I fully expect that we will hit that goal. I will be tracking it personally to make sure that we do, and that we don't miss it again.
Okay, and then, yeah, I mean, if their supply chain issues existed last year, I imagine some of those issues may still exist to date. And so it sounds like you're more than on track to meet your goal, given what you just stated, though. You I think referenced DC Plug in your opening maybe, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more and provide some updates, including, if you could, an update on the status of the second and third biennial plan feeders for that project.
Yes. So DC Plug, which you helped champion, it's well underway. We recently approved the third biennial plan. Now, in terms of status and construction, where we are in the first, second, and third, I believe at this point we have one feeder underground. Out of the first biennial plan, there are some others that are under construction. One part of a much larger project on Oregon Avenue and a few others. In terms of plan two, but the second biennial plan, most of those are in the design phase. And because we just approved, and when I say just, it was at the end of January, we just approved the third biennial plan. It's very, very much in its infancy. But the program is moving. We are continuing to monitor the cost. There's a $500 million cost cap that we are monitoring to ensure that, again, the ratepayers' money is being used properly.
Okay, and then you all provided a response prior to the hearing that mentioned 100% of DC Plug related contracts for electrical work on DC Plug feeders, 308, were awarded to CBEs, and that's in line with the goals as authored in the legislation in 2014. And I'm proud to have been the author, with the support of my colleagues, of that legislation and putting in place that ambitious, albeit achievable goal. On the other hand, for DC Plug feeder 14900, that number is only 42%. Do you know why that is?
I do not offhand, but I can get that information for you. We can follow up.
Yeah, if you could, I'd love to hear that. So if you can follow up with the committee, I would appreciate it. I'm going to turn now to Councilmember Pinto for a second round.
Great, thanks, Chairman McDuffie. So picking up from where we were just talking about our city achieving some of our climate change goals, in reviewing so many of these cases this past year, where are you now seeing a greater need for investment for the district to achieve our climate and energy goals?
That's a great question. I think, one of the things about the goal for 100% renewable energy is DC is uniquely situated as opposed to other states that have similar goals, namely because we're a dense urban population, right? And so therefore, you don't have fields for solar arrays. We're not on the coast, and we can't have offshore wind. And so a majority of our energy that comes from renewable sources is either going to have to come on rooftop solar or something of that nature, or from outside the bounds of DC. And so how this ties into your question is ensuring that the distribution grid in the DC can handle the additional power coming in from renewable sources. And so really what I see is making sure that there's enough money to upgrade the hosting capacity of the grid, which is part of why we issued that rulemaking, which is part of the reason why we did Capital Grid Project to allow 70 megawatts of additional DER hosting capacity. I think this will continue to be a problem, or not necessarily a problem, but continue to be a thing where we have to make sure we upgrade the grid to handle energy coming from non-traditional sources, DERs, and going back onto the grid. So I think that's probably the number one place for investment.
Thank you so much. I think that's a
And
really.
I'm sorry, I just want to add one. And also, you know, when we start talking about electrification, transportation, and being able to adequately support that, that's all involves the distribution grid. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's an important point. And thank you for sharing that. And kind of to that end, is there coordination or collaboration that you all have with other district agencies to share those kind of ideas and concerns as things will continue to develop?
Yes, you know, we have work groups that focus on certain things. We have interconnection working groups, RM40. We have Solar for All working groups where we're working through the CREF billing issue that's going on right now. And so, and those routinely include DOEE, Office of People's Counsel. We also have outside entities who are stakeholders in the community. And so we continue to work in a collaborative process to really try and solve a lot of these problems.
Okay, is there a routinized stakeholders meeting that you all have, or it kind of happens on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, there are, so because there are a number of different work groups, I wouldn't say, you know, there's just a standard meeting for just one issue. There's a number of them. And so if there's a particular work group that you're interested in, we can certainly get you that schedule. But it depends on the topic and it depends on what's on their agenda.
Okay. I want to move on to gas, and I heard your conversation with Chairman McDuffie about the climate business plan and some of the other avenues we have as a city to protect folks from gas leaks. Can you talk about some of those efforts to prevent leaks? You mentioned that $300 million is allocated so far. Do you know if that's how much is needed to fix all of the leaks, or if there's a strategy in place to triage some of the, I hate to use the word more egregious leaks because all gas leaks are problematic, but more egregious threatening leaks?
Yes. And so as Washington Gas goes through and, you know, proposes pipe replacement through project pipes, they are triaging, using your words, the most egregious pipes and tackling those first. I mentioned earlier, there's an advanced leak detection pilot that's going on in conjunction with the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF. And what that's looking at doing is using, it's like, I think, a $1.4 million pilot, and they're looking at using the latest high-tech technology to really look at leak detection. And so that covers a gambit of things. It could be satellite, it could be different things. But so there's that. There's also the inspections that our office does as well, and where we look. I can also tell you that I believe Washington Gas, either on a 3 or 5 year period, does inspections of all 1,200 miles of their pipe to ensure that there are 90, I guess, again, using your language, the more egregious leaks to try and provide protection to our residents and ratepayers.
Okay. So in our effort to move away from gas, we heard from public testimony today that Commissioner Beverly had stated that PSC does not have a plan for getting off gas, but that the PSC's job is to make Washington Gas economically robust, and that couldn't be done if they went off of gas. Do you agree with this assessment of PSC's mission and objectives? And as we look to other gas companies around the country, including Washington Gas, that seems to be making an effort to do this, who have diversified their services, how do you kind of see the commission's role in this space of transition?
Yeah, you know, what I'll say is Of course, I wasn't there at that meeting. And so I didn't hear what Commissioner Beverly's exact words were. And so I don't know what to say with respect to that. What I will say is the commission's mission is to ensure that the utilities provide safe, reliable, and affordable services to its ratepayers, and that we also use the Clean Energy Act as the lens to which to view all of our decisions. I think that our job, again, because of our authority, which is derived from the council, we can't disenfranchise Washington Gas. What we can say is, look, the city has these goals and you need to provide a plan on how you're going to get there. And if that plan is not feasible, we can tell them, give us another plan. But we personally do not have that power. When you look at legislatures, when you look at gas bans across the country, they have not come from the public service commissions. They have come from either the council or the legislature, whatever that body is called. And so we personally don't have that power. I would also note that those bans typically are for prospective service, right? They don't say get rid of it completely, they say no new hookups. And so again, that's why Project Pipes is important, to ensure what infrastructure we do have is safe, reliable, and not leaking.
Well, thank you very much. I'm out of time. If I can just, Chairman McDuffie, just say one more sentence, not a question, which is just that we heard some good ideas today about retrofitting and using some ARPA dollars to address some of our retrofitting needs. And so I'll just put that out there. If you're not already working on that, I'm sure it's something that's on your radar as we are creative with using the dollars that we're going to be receiving and have received from the federal government. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. I just quickly before I transition to the Office of People's Counsel, but I want to, Councilmember Pinto, let me know if you need time for further questions. But I want to ask Chairman Thompson, according to one of the responses you gave us, PSC plans to audit PEPCO's quarterly, their quarter one FY22 filing. Is that understanding correct? When is the filing due, and what is the anticipated timeline for the audit?
I'm sorry, you're referring to one of the responses in the questions, or what I said earlier?
Yeah, I think this was a response that you all provided to question 88, where you said you plan to review PEPCO's late quarter one 2022 filing to ensure compliance with the plan.
Oh, yes. And so I believe, you said question 88?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, sorry, yes, okay. So I believe, yes, the filing is due by March 31st. So we still have another month. And so we will do the audit, but my suspicion is that will not be ready for public consumption, our final report in that review, probably until late in the year, maybe, late in the year, I would say late in the year.
Okay. And then also, this is something you provided pre-hearing. I think this was maybe question 73, but you mentioned in those responses that Washington Gas is subject to a commission requirement that it not resume disconnection until its call center comes into compliance with natural gas quality of service standards. Tell me more about that situation. Is the requirement not to resume disconnections still in effect?
Yes. So what we had this fall was an issue in which we received a number of complaints that there were people would call Washington Gas to report or for customer service issues, and the wait would be over 2 hours. And this had been an ongoing issue at Washington Gas, and we said this was simply unacceptable. So we issued an order directing them to put together a corrective action plan, a CAP, And then we also said that until you meet the standards under these guidelines, you cannot do any disconnections or late fees. We then, and when I say we, I mean myself included, we then had bi-weekly, monthly calls with Washington Gas to monitor the progress of the implementation of the corrective action plan. OPC joined us on these calls as well over a number of months. And I am pleased to say that they are in compliance now. But what we did a few weeks ago was we said, well, 1 month compliance is not sufficient, because 1 month doesn't really say enough. We said you have to be in compliance for a full quarter before you can resume disconnections. That quarter ends at the end of March. And so to your original question, yes, the disconnections are still on pause. And if their report comes out at the end of March, showing that they're within standards, they then have to file with the commission asking for permission to resume disconnections, at which time we will take that matter up.
Okay, and then speaking of complaints, you all provided some information to the committee that 84% of complaints received about Verizon were actually quality of service related. What types of service, quality of service issues were you all hearing in those complaints? And is there anything that you all are doing to address some of the complaints that you heard from customers?
You know, we heard a variety of complaints, but again, our consumer services team, they have been doing an excellent job responding to those complaints. And I wouldn't say there's any one specific issue. It's kind of a myriad of complaints.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add before we transition to?
Ask somebody about Verizon.
You are actually not muted, Sandra Matabu-Fry. Thank you. Chair Thompson, is there anything else you want to add to the record before we transition?
No, thank you, and I appreciate the time to be here before you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to transition now to the Office of People's Counsel, and we've been joined by the People's Counsel, Sandra Matabu-Fry, who's here with us. I'm going to turn to you for your statement. Thank you for being here as well. It's good to see you. Now you can actually take mute off. You can unmute yourself. I do it all the time, so.
And I didn't touch anything.
We can hear you now, so you can begin your statement.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman McDuffie, members of the committee, Council Member Pinto, and the viewing public. For the record, I am DC People's Counsel, Sandra Matabu-Fry. Today, I will provide an overview of OPC's 2021 performance, highlighting our activities, accomplishments, but most important, the tangible benefits we've provided to DC utility ratepayers. These are unprecedented times. We face a global pandemic, catastrophic climate change, costly grid modernization, escalating rates, which exacerbate the energy burdens experienced by our most vulnerable and underserved consumers. Chairman McDuffie, I am, in the interest of time, I have submitted a full copy of my testimony, but I'm going to try and cut out some pieces just to shorten it a little. But going forward, despite the pandemic, we were highly proactive in FY21. To date, OPC proposed language for the Council's COVID-19 legislation, attended hundreds of virtual ANC and community meetings, conducted quarterly virtual social service forums, convened a climate change community conversation forum, the first of its kind in the district, litigated cases before the PSC and FERC, commissioned and published an electrification report, updated our consumer information database, website, and resumed podcasting. We enhanced our climate change section's advocacy on environmental injustice and racial equity. And to date, we have received over 2,900 COVID-related and other consumer complaints. At the outset of the pandemic, OPC worked with the Mayor's Office, the DC Council, and utilities to institute a moratorium on utility disconnections. We successfully fought for strong consumer protections to mitigate the financial impact of the pandemic on ratepayers. We partnered with other DC agencies on the Here to Help DC initiative by engaging in targeted social and traditional media messaging, supporting a website for consumers to access pandemic resources, and distributing information on bill payment assistance at public events. We boosted our internal consumer education and outreach. For FY21 to date, our consumer services and water divisions attended 932 virtual ANC and community meetings. In February 2021, we sent postcards explaining the availability of financial assistance programs to 148 households in wards 4, 5, 7, and 8. In October 2021, OPC mailed 337,000 postcards, alerting residents in all 8 wards of the end of the moratorium. The public response to the mailers was extremely positive, and as expected, we received an influx of calls from consumers seeking utility relief during the pandemic. Our consumer services water divisions have received a total of 2979 consumer complaints to date. Not surprisingly, the data outlined in our affordability study and recent census data confirm that many of the complainants were eligible for utility assistance. 75% of these cases were from wards 4, 5, 7, and 8. The racial demographics in these wards average 73% Black, 14% white, 10% Hispanic, and 1.5% Asian. In anticipation of the end of the utility disconnection moratorium, OPC worked with the DC Council to put protections in place for low-income consumers. Our efforts contributed to the enactment of legislation extending critical post-moratorium protections through January 2022. OPC also hosted quarterly social service meetings, each with an average of 65 representatives from nonprofits, community organizations, government agencies, and council staff. These discussions helped OPC staff connect district residents to utility relief programs and other vital social services. OPC's expanded outreach was also instrumental in increasing the applications for the $340 million Stay DC Assistance Program. We've heightened our OPC's public profile by enhancing communication protocols, expanding the use of social media, increasing multilingual outreach by translating press releases, consumer advisories, and other materials in multiple languages. We also published our OPC Connection newsletter and produced OPC Radio Connect, an educational podcast on utility topics airing on dcradio.gov and other podcast apps. I have personally appeared on media programs to inform consumers about the utility disconnection moratorium, bill payment assistance, payment plan options, and conservation tips. My Facebook Live and YouTube interviews with WHUR at Home, Washington Informer TV, and Afro News Live informed DC residents that we were here to help. OPC also used social media to educate and engage the community. We have 2,658 followers on Twitter, 1,000 followers on Facebook, and 835 followers on Instagram. And we recently added a LinkedIn page. Social media has helped us respond to our clients on a real-time basis. For example, we received a large number of tweets and emails from residents complaining about Washington Gas's customer call service centers. They complained of long hold times, missed appointments, and other service-related problems. In response, I directly contacted WGL officials and the PSC. We were told that the problem was caused by a change in WGL's vendor. In response to our complaint, the PSC subsequently issued an order directing the company to implement measures to improve their service. And I was listening as the chairman spoke about the process that they were making, what they were doing there, and that they had issued a moratorium or extended the moratorium, making certain that directing Washington Gas not to disconnect until they got their call center together. We are continuing to monitor that. and listening to consumers with respect to those, whether the matter has improved. Across our consumer services platform, we have modernized our service delivery by introducing a new consumer management system. We are redesigning our website to create a more user-friendly and state-of-the-art portal. We recently commissioned a report entitled Equity Assessment of Electrification Incentives in the District of Columbia, which examines potential methods to reduce climate change pollution in the district. It defines, and this is significant, equitable electrification as a transition away from fossil fuels and includes equity implications such as health, access to beneficial programs, and disproportionate cost burdens. In separate PSC dockets, many of which were mentioned previously by the PSC, OPC has advocated for adding distribution and equity assessments to the Commission's climate change analytical framework. We also filed comments before the U.S. Department of Energy, recommending the integration of an equity analysis in its EV research planning to address the needs of disadvantaged communities. And that is electrifying buses and those types of social transport vehicles. Collectively, OPC studies and reports fill the information void caused by the lack of consumer-centric data presently before the PSC and other regulatory bodies. And that is a significant vacuum, because if you don't have consumer-centric information and data, you're not going to make the right decisions. And we want to make certain that it is a holistic and comprehensive approach as we move toward a decarbonized environment. Climate change is a global challenge coupled with the impact of environmental injustice plaguing disadvantaged and minority communities. It requires immediate action. OPC is dedicated to supporting Mayor Bowser and the Council's aggressive climate change goals in a cost-effective and equitable manner. 2 years ago, I created a climate change section that is actively involved in all district and federal proceedings impacting the district's environment and climate. This year, OPC's climate advocacy at the PSC included providing detailed analysis of utility climate change plans. Those are the cases that were referenced in 1167, where the utilities have submitted individual climate plans. Chairing a subcommittee tasked with developing an analytical framework to evaluate the climate impact of utility proposals, and submitting an analysis of the cost effectiveness of PEPCO's proposed energy efficiency and demand response programs. There we're concerned that there is not a duplication, particularly of the work that's being done by the SCU. In FY22 and beyond, OPC will continue to coordinate and build partnerships with local and federal government agencies, private sector organizations, and environmental and climate change lay advocates. I really believe that consumer buy-in is a critical component for success. Therefore, I will ensure that everyday consumers are included in the planning process at an early stage. And as I mentioned, I held the OPC's first conversation forum, The Price You Pay, Straight Talk, a community conversation about climate change and environmental injustice. 400 individuals participated over Zoom, Facebook Live, and Twitter. And the forum brought together national environmental justice and climate advocates, government staff, clean energy professionals, and community members online and in person at Busboys and Poets Anacostia location. One of the things that I did want to say about that is I heard today so many people have not, many of the witnesses testified for the need to spread the word, that people aren't aware. And that was my primary point of having this forum, that no one is, we have a lot of seminars and webinars where we attend, and a lot of language is used that people don't understand, and they don't know that this is a reality for them and that they must be involved. And that was the purpose of that particular forum. And when we heard that 400 people participated, we were pleased. But when you think about it in the big scheme, 400 people is minuscule with the number of people that we need to reach and the number of people that need to be conversant with the dire responsibility to transition away from carbon. I'm going to try and shorten this a little because this is our litigation section. Throughout 2021, OPC's litigation attorneys worked on a broad range of local and federal utility matters, delivering measurable benefits and savings in furtherance of our statutory mandate. LSD worked on PEPCO's interconnection issues. We filed petitions before the PSC regarding Washington Gas's gas leaks, PEPCO's construction activities, addressing some complaints that we received regarding personal residential property damage. And we litigated PEPCO and Washington Gas rate cases. One of the things that I did want to mention is that we frequently initiate these petitions and bring those to the attention of the PSC and the council before there is any activity. And the PSC and the council usually respond favorably to our petitions, but we are there first. And I did want to make that part of the record. As I mentioned, we filed a petition with the commission because we had heard a lot of consumers complain that the company, that PEPCO, was in their neighborhoods, and as a result of the construction, they were seeing property damage, cracks in their walls and their pavement. We petitioned the the PSC, and the PSC did respond by directing PEPCO to use, prudently look at its construction practices and to develop ways of avoiding damage to residential and commercial property. The interconnection issue, that is huge, and we have heard and we have followed that from the very beginning, and it has been, in fact, a seesaw of movement and then nothing and then movement again. We most recently got a mounting consumer complaints about continued slow interconnection times, a lack of transparency about the interconnection process, unreasonable charges for distribution upgrades, and PEPCO to failing to provide a correction of bills, failure to provide correct bills. We are working with the DC government, and we will be petitioning the PSC to investigate PEPCO's actions. That will be forthcoming very shortly. We also worked on rate cases for both PEPCO and Washington Gas. In 2021, over the objection of all the non-utility parties in the case, the PSC granted PEPCO's request for a multi-year rate plan. We have filed an appeal with the DC Court of Appeals for certain portions of that order. And more importantly, we are monitoring PEPCO's rollout of its plan to ensure that this new rate setting mechanism benefits and does not harm consumers. Just going briefly to Washington Gas, they filed a rate case in January of 2020 for $35 million. It ended in a settlement of 19.5, whereby they waived all distribution costs for the residential essential service customers, which are low-income consumers, and required WGL to file an annual report on its greenhouse gas emissions. So those were two major victories for us. We also talked about the gas leaks. OPC petitioned the PSC to investigate Washington Gas's leak reduction practices following our discovery of hazardous natural gas leaks and incomplete WGL leak reporting. The PSC held OPC's motion in abeyance and convened instead a technical conference with the parties. That technical conference took place in the fall. We remain concerned, though, that WGL is not using best practices, that WGL's pipeline selection process is flawed, and that WGL has no pipeline inventory map to facilitate remediation. We plan on pushing forward for a formal investigation to ensure that WG has a plan in place to comprehensively address gas leaks. Further delays, as we all know, jeopardizes the safety of WGL's delivery system, allows harmful methane emissions, and results in unnecessary risks. So time is of the essence. We need to move forward. I'm not going to talk too much. Well, it's just a sentence, but we are very active at FERC and PJM. And that's because it's important, because wholesale cost of energy is set at the federal level and not regulated by the DC Public Commission, DC PSC. I can't conclude without discussing OPC's view of racial equity in the district. Addressing racial and socioeconomic inequities were fundamental elements of all of OPC's advocacy and educational campaigns in FY21, and in fact have been a part of our tradition. A racially equitable district in its broadest and most aspirational terms would create an environment where access to benefits and opportunities are not defined by race or economic standard. And we have to be intentional when we do this, when we look at it, and not just pay lip service to it. The first step in reaching any level of social parity is to identify the problem, look for the root causes, determine potential solutions, including the resources that are needed to make a meaningful difference, and curate a plan to solve the problem. Unfortunately, as we all know, solving racial inequity is not simple. The district's commitment to requiring every government agency to affirmatively incorporate racial equity in its operations is a giant first step. Coordination among and between agencies will play a huge role in the success of the district's equity goals. Racial equity for utility consumers has many branches. They include workforce development, environmental justice, grossly uneven energy burdens, affordability, access, and health-related issues. OPC has been in the vanguard of efforts to ensure that the least protected are not overlooked. Our policies provide cost-saving benefits to all consumers. However, for consumers at the lower end of the income bracket, many of whom are Black and other people of color, a 20% reduction in their utility bill may mean food on the table or life-saving medicine. We must ensure that racial minorities, underserved and disadvantaged neighborhoods do not become dumping grounds for noxious pollutants, and that these neighborhoods are not the last to receive the benefits of clean air technologies that reduce asthma and other respiratory diseases. While these are the most obvious impacts of racial and social economic disparity in the district, we recognize that much more work needs to be done. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I am available to respond to any questions.
And thank you for your testimony. As always, very comprehensive. I do want to, I'm going to probably hone in on some of the things that you already mentioned, and maybe just give you an opportunity to expound on some of them. I know it sounds like you wanted to provide a little bit more information on some of the concerns that were raised by witnesses regarding Washington Gas and the project pipes and gas leaks. So if you want to take an opportunity right now to do that and expound on that, you can do so.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. These are longstanding problems. And if we look at the objective of decarbonizing the district, then we really have to address the fact that we can't continue in business as usual capacity, and that we can't, just rely on how we've operated in the past. It's interesting because, because I've been with the office for so long, I was here at the beginning of all of these programs, both DC Plug and Project Pipes. And at the time, those were good programs. We were trying to accomplish a goal, but most of those are 20 years old. Times have changed. We were not, although climate was a problem, climate change was a problem, we were not activated by that. We were not focusing on climate change. We were looking at very narrow ways of addressing what were, immediate problems. I believe that we need to pause and see whether or not they are still the best ways of meeting their goals. Now, if we look particularly at project pipes and the $500 million that has been invested there or will be invested, the witnesses made good points that we are investing in a system that we know is contributing to the problem with the methane emissions, and that will stall the ability of the district to meet its goals. So maybe we need to say, do we need to put that much money in pipes and replacing pipes? And it's very difficult for me to take that position because I agree with the chairman that safety is an issue. We can't just stop. It can't be just a cold cut and we no longer repair pipes. It's a safety issue. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on, that we have traditionally focused on. But it's like it's a Solomon's choice. And it really isn't one. There is no, you have to do one and you can't do the other. We have to figure out a way of making certain that we stand by, and protect the safety of our constituents and our customers. And at the same time, move forward with reaching our carbon decarbonization goals. That's really the bottom line. How do we do that? And I believe that we have to, then we have to look at how much we're spending for pipe replacement. One of the problems, as I mentioned, that we have is whether or not Washington Gas is using best practices, whether or not they are replacing pipes. They have two ways of replacing pipes: their normal replacement and their project pipe replacement. Are they focusing? Which ones are they focusing on? Are they focusing on those that are in most need of repair, are the most risky, or is it just a general revenue stream that they are trying to get? And if that's the case, we need to really make a separate assessment and perhaps use that money to facilitate our decarbonization and climate change goals. And that's moving slightly ahead in terms of achieving our climate change goals and making certain that they are in fact equitable. We do need to make certain that we don't always rely on ratepayer funds to pay for that, so that some reallocation of funds that are already being expended can be used to facilitate and in a way subsidize some of the energy burdens that low-income consumers are receiving or experiencing. And also we can look at, government funds, also, federal subsidies, grants. There has to be another way of funding our climate change goals.
We heard about some of that. Yeah, we heard about some of that with some of the public witnesses who testified using federal funds and trying to figure out ways to address concerns that were raised by some of the witnesses too about any thought of transitioning and who's in the position to transition even, right? We talked about the use of gas appliances, and some people in a better position than others to make a choice when it comes to those types of things, and others just simply don't have a choice in terms of being able to afford to transition if they so chose. I want to, you talked about the equity assessment of electrification incentives study, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more specifically about OPC's role in helping the district meet its clean energy goals. And so take an opportunity to talk more specifically about you all's role and what specifically you're doing to help us achieve our clean energy goals.
As I mentioned, we are actively involved in all of the PSC proceedings that are looking at climate change and the district's goals. And in addition, I have commissioned an electric equity paper that addresses exactly what we can do and what we should be doing to facilitate that. For example, our three major focuses would be affordability, environmental justice, and access to program benefits. So those, that's where our role is, one, to bring those to the attention of the commission and the regulatory bodies that will be making decisions. And in terms of specific recommendations, looking at the data that we have compiled, that we have, certain certain wards, focusing on the wards that need the most help. And those generally are identified as 4, 5, 7, and 8. And seeing what types of programs we can use to facilitate their involvement, because one of the problems that we know is that they don't have access, and that they are, that their energy burdens are considerably higher. So that goes back to what kinds of programs can we use to mitigate their burdens. We have looked at subsidies. We've looked at the programs that other utilities, other jurisdictions are using or utilizing. For example, New Jersey and Massachusetts and New York all have programs and plans to address sort of the equity issue and making certain that the consumers in all of their, all of the neighborhoods with various socioeconomic levels can participate in these programs and are not really, as I said, left behind. And then, it's also environmental justice. And we kind of, because we have not focused on that previously, it's something that we overlook. But we know that, in many instances, it's the poorer neighborhoods or the neighborhoods that are less served, underserved neighborhoods. And for many of those are comprised of racial minorities, where the polluting facilities are placed, or you have the emissions. Someone talked about buses and the vehicles that are stored or emitting emissions.
That was me. I actually talked about that, so I'm gonna. Okay,
you're someone. But we hear those all the time. So it's how do you address that? What do you do? And I think that is where you have to be intentional and not, again, make certain that you are putting in place procedures and processes that will actually correct those and mitigate those problems. Now, what
can I stop you there? Can I stop you there for a second? Because I think that's a very important point you just made. What are you doing to put procedures in place to mitigate some of the things that exist? And I think in part, it's a pertinent question because in many cases, there needs to be new procedures where some of the older, antiquated policies and laws have been in place for quite some time and have created the inequities that exist when it comes to environmental injustices across the city. So I wanted to just stop you because I thought you were making a very important point. I didn't want to move too quickly beyond that point. Let me ask you about a different study though. I understand that the energy affordability study is under final review. If you could explain how that is going to benefit district consumers.
That is a study that we have been working on for a while, and it has been finalized, and we now have it before peer review because we wanted to make certain that it was comprehensive. And we have in fact used a lot of the data in it in ongoing proceedings. It's posted on our website so that we are using the information. And again, it is, in a way, it is something that information that we intuitively knew, but we now have the data to support it so that we have, information on the wards, the penetration of social service programs and subsidies in those wards. We have information on the economic indicators of those wards, the educational levels, the income levels, and the cost of gas. One of the most important issues of the affordability study was, what is the energy burden of consumers? What is the energy burden and how is that, distributed across the district? And we found, of course, not of course, but, as expected, that, some of the wards have a disproportionate energy burden. And it's really interesting because when you think of it, we know that it's a fact because electric, energy rates are uniform. So it doesn't matter if you make $100,000 or you make $50,000 or $25,000, you pay the same amount. And that means that it takes up all of your disposable income. And unfortunately, our consumers in certain wards, there's a higher concentration of those consumers with high energy burdens in certain wards. And we have to address that. And we're also educating consumers on climate change. That's an important component as well, to make certain that consumers know that there are services available and that they can participate and receive some of the funds that are available. One of the findings in our affordability study was that, many of our consumers just don't participate and that the rate of participation is really, really low for no explicable reason. And we need to, one, educate consumers, and then we need to figure out how do we breach that penetration, level. That's something that's been consistent through the years, but how do we make certain that we are reaching them and that people are partaking and making good of the available resources? So that's one thing.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. And then I want you to talk a little bit about this. We had a number of witnesses who talked about your work and really thanking you all about some of the ways that you've assisted with addressing water bills. I know there were other bills that were mentioned as well, but this is more of a new function of the office. And I know we've chatted about this in previous oversight hearings, both performance and budget. And so I want to give you an opportunity to talk me through any issues or concerns you may be having with the Water Services Division, resources, et cetera.
Well, our water service, thank you for that question. Our Water Services Division is really stretched in terms of staff resources. And they have done a phenomenal job in reaching out to water consumers. And they are, the problem, of course, they experience the same problem that the agency itself does in terms of just getting the word out, that people aren't aware that there is a water section and that we can help on water issues. And for the most part, it is by word of mouth that we get consumers. And we have been able to, as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, utilize social media. We have done, attending virtual ANC meetings so that consumers are more aware of what we've done. But it is really, in a way, almost a miraculous, how much work we have been able to do with such limited resources. And I think that it goes really to the staff and how committed they are to the mission of the office. So they all go the extra yard, even though it requires them to do an inordinate amount of work, but they do. And we are very appreciative of them. And that's why you see the outpouring of support from consumers on what has happened, because it's frustrating for them to go to the agencies and they don't get the type of response that they need or want, and that we can intervene on their behalf and make things happen. And, I would touch on the other utilities in that sense, particularly with the ending of the moratorium and a focus on payment plans, that one of the things that we find is that by going direct, and this is another historical issue, by going to the utilities, that the consumers will frequently sign up for a payment plan that they can't afford, just to make certain that they are reconnected. And then in a few weeks, they are in arrears again and subject to disconnection. We have been able to intervene on their behalf, and we generally get a better payment plan because we, really appeal to the utilities to make certain that they are asking for a realistic plan that can have some longevity. It is certainly better to extend it and, get guaranteed revenue as opposed to getting a high upfront contribution that the consumer can't sustain. So that's another way that we, represent consumers.
Okay, and then you mentioned the moratorium. Talk a little bit about what happened when it was lifted. Do you know how many consumers had their service shut off for non-payment? Once the moratorium was lifted, and if you have that information, do you have it broken down by the type of utility? And if you don't have it handy, if you could provide it.
I don't have it handy, but I can provide it. And I do believe that we did provided one of the questions, but I don't have it right in front of me. I do know that there was an influx of consumer complaints when it was actually lifted. And it was interesting that over the holiday season, when we were somewhat short-staffed, we started getting all sorts of calls. And it seems as if our name was in a billing or something, correspondence that was sent out saying that we could help. And so we were really, really, really flooded. And it was very difficult just to maintain that. People had to come in, from off on leave just to fill in and address those complaints, which we did, as we always do. But it's indicative of the type of problems that we have, with consumers and with particularly, especially with the Water Services Division, where we are under-resourced.
Well, talk about some of the successes perhaps you're seeing in terms of your outreach. I know you all typically get a lot of supportive testimony during this time of year when we have performance about your outreach and engagement efforts, and I think it is well-founded in terms of the support that you get. At the same time, it sounds like there may be some resource issues. So talk about how, what the successes look like and how effective you all have been in reaching consumers to talk about what you all have to offer in terms of being an advocate for them and all the various divisions that you support customers.
Yes, and as I mentioned, we have had since October 1, 2021, we have received 2,900 consumer complaints, and we have successfully resolved in excess of 95% of those. And that's, reflective of the job that we do. One of the things that we also do, goes back to education and, how we reach those consumers, what we do and what are the successes. I would say that people are a lot more informed than they have previously been, just by our outreach and, communications. We are doing the podcast so that we're reaching more people. And while when we reach more people, they are more apt to come to us or to tell their friends and to, expand our ability to help, to provide assistance. Another thing that we do, and this is from my Consumer Services Division, is that we have these quarterly social service meetings. And that's because we want to have a kind of a holistic approach. And what we find is that a lot of the social service agencies that are in district social service agencies either aren't aware of the service that we provide, and we may not always be aware of the services that they provide. So that by sharing information and knowing what various agencies can do and will do, we're able to help a consumer not only with their utility bill, but to refer them for other areas where they can get social services. I believe one of the witnesses today mentioned that one of our consumer reps in the water division was able to help her not only with her water bill, but with some other issues. And that's our approach. It's not just to the extent that we can be a one-stop shop. We try to do that, but we also work very closely with our sister agencies to make certain that they are aware when they're dealing with their clients that we also provide assistance with utility matters.
You all have done a great job, throughout the pandemic and even before that, in terms of your consumer services and engagement of the public around what it is you all do and how you can assist where people have complaints or concerns. And we consistently get, I think, pretty darn good remarks and support of the way that you all engage ANCs and civic associations and other sort of constituencies across the District of Columbia. So I did want to mention that and put that on the record. And it's not just when we hear that, doing performance oversight. So I think that's important because there are a host of other agencies that we do hear about who have challenges. And obviously, there are some agencies that have more direct interactions on the daily lives of residents. And I say that understanding that people's power and their water and their gas clearly impact them every day, but they don't always know that there is a public Office of Public People's Counsel. And so sharing that information, getting out and engaging people know that there is an OPC and that there is an advocate there to help them with some of these issues, I think is extraordinarily important. So I appreciate the work that you do there.
Thank you.
Let me just ask finally, you all are conducting a technical review of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is obviously federal legislation that was signed, I think, November last year. Tell me more about this technical review and what you all are expecting from that. What's the status of it?
We are still doing our internal review. We have retained experts to assist us in that. And, one of the things that we would like to see is how those funds can be used. And where, I was listening and hearing, some of the network, the system networks that can be improved, maybe those funds can be used as opposed to strictly ratepayer funds. That would be, if we could achieve that, that would be a significant victory. Because again, we really do have to, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that we have to make certain that we get, it's not even a question. We have to get to our ultimate goal, but we have to do it in a way that is affordable and that, takes advantage of all of the resources that are available. It has to be a new way of thinking. It's really standard to say, well, this is the way we do it. This is the way it's been done. We have, franchises that need to be considered, but we're in a different world. And we really have to expand our horizon to make certain that we're doing, that we're going to achieve our goals. We don't want to be here 10 years from now and say, oh, well, we missed it by a couple of points, or we're not quite there yet. We need to be there. And, how do we get there is really the, $1 million question.
For that, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I actually have concluded the call, the questions that I want to ask at the moment. I appreciate your answering a number of questions before this hearing, and obviously your response to those will be included into the record as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we go on to our next agency?
Yes, and yes, I would. I would like to say that, I've said it during the course of this discussion, but I really do want to emphasize how important it is for all of the entities to move together, move forward with a common goal. We have, partners. I'm particularly impressed with the environmental community, climate change advocates, but also we have to make certain that the utilities are involved and that they understand, what their role is, as well as the commission. I was pleased to hear the chairman, articulate the mission of the PSC is to ensure that consumers receive just, reasonable, equitable, and safe utility service? That's the fundamental question. And how do we do that? And sometimes we lose sight of, how we're going to get there and what the priorities are and who gets to speak the loudest. That's important as well. We cannot have, just the utilities speaking and even OPC being the only, representative. It's a broad base that we need to, make certain that everyone is involved and that everyone has a voice in the outcome, because we surely will all be impacted by whatever decisions are made.
Thank you for that, Sandra Matabu-Fryer. We appreciate your testimony and you being before the committee this afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure thing. Next, we have the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration, or ABRA. The mission of ABRA is to support the public's health, safety, and welfare through the control and regulation of the sale and distribution of alcoholic beverages in the district. ABRA conducts licensing, training, adjudication, community outreach, enforcement efforts to serve licensees, law enforcement agencies, advisory neighborhood commissions, civic associations, and the general community so that they understand and adhere to all district laws, regulations, and ABRA policies. We have now turning to our government witness for ABRA. We have, there he is. Fred Musali is right in front of me. He's the director of the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration, and we're going to turn to you, Director Musali, for a statement.
Thank you, Chairperson McDuffie. Good afternoon, Chairperson McDuffie, members of the Committee on Business on Economic Development, staff, and members of the public. My name is Fred Musali, and I am the Director of the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration. I am pleased to say that ABRA and the ABC Board have made a meaningful difference over the past year during the COVID-19 pandemic. This included our agency implementing legislation that allows all returning citizens to work at, and in most cases own, a medical cannabis establishment, regardless of any previous criminal arrests or convictions. Additionally, our agency has implemented legislation that significantly reduces barriers and costs previously faced by qualifying patients that need access to medical cannabis. Our agency looks forward to soon implementing legislation that helps to attract full-service grocery stores towards 7 and 8. We recognize that the pandemic has been tragic for many district residents and their families. We also recognize that the pandemic has taken a toll on the industry that supports many of these residents and their families through ownership and employment opportunities. As we begin to emerge from the effects of the pandemic, we can now clearly see that there is still much more work to be done to make our city more equitable. We look forward to continuing our work with the committee in FY22 to continue to innovate and rebuild the district in a manner that is equitable and beneficial to district residents in all 8 wards. I would now like to share some of the board's recent initiatives and rulemakings in FY21 and thus far in FY22. I will then discuss ABRA's FY21 successes, focusing specifically on the agency's recent accomplishments in the areas of enforcement, licensing, community outreach, and adjudication. The board, under the leadership of Chairperson Donovan Anderson, continued to effectively and efficiently navigate the board's responsibilities during the pandemic. The board was successfully able to hold virtual hearings and meet throughout the public health emergency. The board has taken its public health emergency role seriously and played a major role through emergency rulemakings by implementing and enforcing various COVID-19 related provisions, including the indoor mask mandate and vaccine documentation verification requirements. The board has met as needed to hear cases involving licensees that have been summarily suspended for violating public safety requirements imposed as a result of the pandemic. The board made numerous improvements to the district's medical cannabis program in FY21 and FY22 to date. This included the board expanding the district's nationally recognized reciprocity program for out-of-state qualifying patients by adding 9 states, including but not limited to Virginia and West Virginia. The board also adopted emergency rules that permit healthcare practitioners to make telehealth recommendations for medical cannabis to qualifying patients by phone or video conference. The board also made several well-received changes to its emergency delivery rules, including permitting the delivery of medical cannabis to patients and district residents other than a patient's home, permitting the curbside delivery of medical cannabis to patients, and increasing the maximum number of delivery vehicles that a dispensary could use to 5. With regard to enforcement, ABRA is proud of the efforts and accomplishments of its enforcement division this past year, which has continued to work in the field, enforcing various public health emergency mandates during the COVID-19 pandemic. ABRA's enforcement division conducted an impressive 11,874 regulatory inspections and investigations in FY21. Notwithstanding the pandemic, ABRA was able to successfully conduct 440 compliance checks for underage drinking in FY21, which exceeded the agency's goal. In FY21, the Noise Task Force conducted 304 noise inspections. This number is expected to increase in FY22 with the reopening of many licensed establishments. The Noise Task Force has already conducted 182 noise inspections through January 19th, 2022. In FY21, the ABRA's Enforcement Division took over enforcement of the medical cannabis program. The agency has conducted inspections of all operating medical cannabis cultivation centers and dispensaries in the district, with 55 medical cannabis facility inspections conducted in FY21. With regard to licensing, ABRA staff did an excellent job in several areas. For example, ABRA issued 3,942 medical cannabis patient registrations in FY21. ABRA staff are on pace to significantly exceed this number in FY22, as 1,998 medical cannabis patient cards have been issued as of February 2nd, 2022. ABRA's rollout of its Turnaround Thursday initiative in FY22 has been a significant reason for this increase. This program allows patients who have completed an application to be issued digital and physical registrations during their Thursday walk-in session visit. Of note, over 888 patients have been issued medical cannabis registrations thus far in FY22 as part of this Turnaround Thursday initiative. Starting in FY21, ABRA has also processed and issued over 823 alcohol carryout and delivery endorsements to eligible on-premise licensees. The alcohol carryout and delivery endorsement has been critical to restaurants and other on-premise licensees during the COVID-19 pandemic by allowing them to sell alcohol to go that is accompanied by at least one prepared food item. Finally, in FY21, ABRA successfully renewed the district's licensed Class A retailer, wholesaler, and manufacturer licenses. All licensed Class A off-premise retailers were placarded and underwent a 66-day public comment period, including notice to affected ANCs and publication in the DC Register. With regard to community outreach, ABRA continued to be proactive during the pandemic with offering virtual community outreach and education trainings and presentations at no cost to provide accurate and timely information to the public. ABRA was able to train 584 members of the public in FY21. This significantly exceeded the 245 members of the public that were trained in FY20. ABRA also partnered with other district agencies to offer several helpful information sessions in FY21 and FY22 to date. These information sessions include ABRA partnering with the district's Fire and Emergency Medical Services Department to offer a fire prevention and winter heating information session to assist on-premise licensees with operating outdoor streeteries during the winter months. Additionally, ABRA partnered with DC Health to offer a rodent abatement information session. ABRA also offered fake identification and books and records compliance training sessions in FY21. In FY21 and FY22 to date, the ABRA also conducted 3 medical cannabis information sessions for potential applicants in the public to help them navigate the medical cannabis registration process. The 3 information sessions included such topics as 1, the medical cannabis facility letter of intent open period, 2, the medical cannabis facility application open period, and 3, the Medical Cannabis Amendment Act of 2021. Fourth, with regard to adjudication, ABRA's Office of the General Counsel was highly productive during the pandemic in assisting the board with adjudicatory matters and rulemaking decisions. In FY21, the board issued 1,244 orders that were written by ABRA's legal staff. This represented a significant increase from the 565 board orders that were written in FY20. In FY21, the board approved 102 new or amended settlement agreements that resulted in a board order. This represented an increase from the 83 approved board settlement agreements in FY20. ABRA's Office of the General Counsel successfully worked with the board in drafting 17 rulemakings in FY21. This included the board issuing several rulemakings in FY21 that related to the COVID-19 pandemic. These rulemakings were critical in providing guidance to licensees and members of the public regarding what activities are prohibited and permitted during the public health emergency. In FY21, ABRA's Office of the General Counsel also conducted streamlined emergency and proposed medical cannabis rules to transfer the medical cannabis program from DC Health to ABRA. As we look ahead, I'd like to focus my discussion on 4 of the agency's ongoing initiatives for FY22. First, the on-premise alcohol renewals. 2, the open application period for medical cannabis business registrations. 3, the implementation of the reopened DC bill once enacted by the council. And 4, the implementation of the Medical Marijuana Patient Access Emergency Amendment Act of 2022. First, ABRA's busiest renewal period since 2019 is underway. Over 1,500 licensees are due for renewal by March 31, 2022. This includes restaurants, hotels, theaters, arenas, boats, clubs, and caterers. ABRA kicked off its renewal season last week by mailing out renewal notices to all eligible on-premise retailers. Once ABRA receives an application from an establishment, the agency will provide the public with a 45-day public comment period. Specifically, ABRA will provide public notice by 1, posting 2 red placards on the outside of the retail establishment, 2, sending written notice to ANCs and the council, and 3, publishing renewal notices on ABRA's website in the DC Register. A late fee of $50 will be assessed for each day a licensee is late to renew, not to exceed the cost of its license. Second, the open application period is currently underway for 5 medical cannabis business registrations. Available for application are 2 cultivation center registrations, 2 testing laboratory registrations, and 1 dispensary registration for either Ward 3 or Ward 5. The open application period closes at noon on Monday, March 28th, 2022. Eligible to file an application by the March 28th deadline are those 176 entities or individuals whose letter of intent were previously approved by the agency. ABRA has worked collaboratively with the Department of Small and Local Business Development in establishing the process for applicants to qualify as a medical cannabis certified business enterprise to be eligible for the 50-point preference. At the conclusion of the application process, ABRA looks forward to sharing with the committee the impact of the 50-point preference for medical cannabis CBs had on the application process. Third, ABRA is preparing for the implementation of the reopened DC bill once enacted by the council. Our agency thanks the committee for moving this comprehensive legislation forward. This legislation is critical to the current and future success of the hospitality sector and will require our agency to implement numerous changes to the district's alcohol laws. 5 of these changes that will be required to implement and enforce. 1 is a streetery registration endorsement for on-premise licenses for 2022 and 2023. 2nd, a third-party alcohol delivery license. 3rd, licensed commercial lifestyle locations, including issues to clarify the authority of private security. 4th, changes to the cap on taverns in the Georgetown Historic District. And 5th, changes designed to attract full-service grocery stores towards 7 and 8. 4th, and finally, ABRA is working in FY22 on the implementation of the Medical Marijuana Patient Access Emergency Amendment Act of 2022, which was signed by Mayor Muriel Bowser on February 11, 2022. Of note, the bill allows qualifying patients 65 years of age and older to self-certify that they are utilizing cannabis for medical purposes to obtain a 2-year registration card from ABRA until September 30th, 2022. To assist qualifying patients 65 years of age and older in obtaining patient cards, ABRA is currently hosting Senior Week from Tuesday, February 22nd through Friday, February 25th, 2022, where patients 65 years of age and older and other patients who have completed application will be issued a digital and physical registrations at no cost during their walk-in visit. In closing, I would like to thank you for your leadership and support, as well as the hard work of the committee staff. Our agency appreciates the opportunity to share our accomplishments and plans for FY22, and we look forward to continuing the work of the committee and its staff. I would also like to thank the hardworking staff at ABRA. I would not be able to share the agency's accomplishments and future plans if not for the commitment made by our staff to ensure that the work gets done. This concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have at this time. And I also, Chairperson McDuffie, want to thank all the witnesses who testified today. I was able to hear their testimony, a lot of helpful comments to help the agency as we move forward. Thank you.
Sure, and thank you, Director Musali. Let me begin by asking about racial equity, and I won't go down all the questions we asked prior to the hearing. You provided us some pretty thorough responses, but I will, for the record, ask you to summarize the agency's efforts around racial equity. And specifically, if you're doing anything with the Office on Racial Equity and Dr. Amber Hewitt, I'd love to hear about that too.
Sure. So with regard to her office, we do have two representatives on Demois. Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure has a racial equity council. So we're on that council serving. And one of the purposes of that is to help the executive in terms of advancing racial equity in the executive, and also help our agency in terms of ways our agency can help to advance racial equity. So we're very excited about that. And I'm fortunate to have two agency representatives on that. Second, want to thank your agency for, thank the council and your committee for moving the Reopen DC bill. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussion about the importance of getting grocery stores in Ward 7 and Ward 8. And I think with the testimony you heard today about food deserts and then concerns about, liquor stores, I think in terms of studies have been shown that getting full service grocery stores, allowing those full service grocery stores to open restaurants as well in Ward 7 and 8 are really, really important. Next, I also want to talk about the open application period, and thank you for working with our agency on the 50-point preference. I think it's going to be really important as we, finish the period that closes on March 28th, to find out as we work with DSLBD, how many equity impact enterprises that we have. I think that as part of the equity impact enterprise, at least 51% of the owners have to be individuals who have been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias because of their identity as a group. So I think it's going to be helpful as we work with DSLBD to find out how many applicants that are applying for these 5 licenses qualified as an equity impact enterprise. So I think that's helpful as well. I think you're on mute, Councilmember.
I certainly am on mute, actually. We're still in an ongoing pandemic. It's been quite some time. So tell me how your staff at the agency is handling things. What's morale like? How are people able to cope and continue to serve the residents of the District of Columbia and licensees?
Sure. Here at ABRA, we're fortunate to have a lot of great staff, that have been able to adjust quite well. I think you heard from our union president, and we appreciate her testifying. And I think we've learned during the pandemic, it's important to have a great relationship with the union, given, what we're facing. That's critical. I think one advantage our agency has had is we've been here pretty much the whole time. We've been in the field. We've been playing a lead role in enforcing, the COVID guidelines. So I think that's helped being here. I would also say that allowing our staff to telework at least 2 days a week for a lot of our agency positions has been helpful in terms of having them in the office, but also allowing employees to telework and get their work at home, I think has helped morale as well.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that morale is going well, given everything that people have had to experience over the last couple of years. And so let me move next to some of the responses that you, and some of the stuff will be slightly redundant. You, like some of the other directors, provided really thorough testimony that covered a number of things that address some of the performance questions I would ordinarily ask. But I do want to put some things specifically on the record. And question 17 of your responses, you noted that ABRA routinely collaborates with other district agencies such as DCRA, OTR, DC Health, and NPD on licensing and enforcement issues, especially regarding businesses complying with COVID-19 mandates. Give me some more details on this. And then before you answer, I want to note that we've been rejoined by Ward 2 Councilmember Brooke Pinto, who's been with us most of the day. And so I'd ask staff to put us on a timer. If you give me a round, and then we'll turn to Councilmember Pinto after this. So if you could, you have the question pending, Director Musali, if you want to respond to that.
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you, Chairperson McDuffie. So I think one of the things that was highlighted in the testimony that we had today, which we've strived for, is the importance of working with other district agencies. I think one of the issues you heard about was hookah enforcement. So clearly on hookah issues, that's something where the primary jurisdiction is DC Health. So as we get those complaints, obviously we want to make sure DC Health gets those. As it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic, our agency has the ability to enforce violations as it relates to alcohol establishments. But if you have, a fast food or other type of establishment, that's going to require collaboration with DC Health and DCRA on those types of issues. So as we get complaints that may fall outside of our scope or jurisdiction, residents want to make sure that they get their concerns involved. And then sometimes with streetery issues, it may not be something that's an ABRA issue. We may need to collaborate with DDOT to make sure we're working with DDOT on streetery issues. Those are just, some of many examples.
I keep muting myself. And then considering the some of the recent pressure that we've seen from Congress and other places regarding mask mandates, vaccine mandates, et cetera, talk about in detail how these mandates may be affecting restaurants and other licensees that ABRA has, especially in generating revenue and keeping the doors open. Obviously, safety is paramount and it should drive how government is operating, but I do recognize the role that your agency plays with respect to our ability of some of our important businesses. I mean, all of our businesses are important, but this specific industry to recover. So you may also want to discuss if the mandates are affecting, hiring or retaining their workforce. Talk about, from your observation, whether you believe patrons are compliant or whether you've seen some hostility there with patrons, how are restaurant owners, operators, staff handling this in your estimation?
Sure. Thank you, Chairperson McDuffie, for that question. I think there's a couple layers there. So first off, our primary focus, was on education. So in terms of working with licensees, our first effort was education, focusing on, warnings were needed initially. So really, there are two components there. We have the mask mandate, which expires at the end of the month. And then we have, the vaccine documentation verification, that recently expired. So I think what I would say is almost all licensees were, willing to work with us with very few exceptions. So very proactive there. So I think that's been a good process. I think clearly, we've heard from some licensees, which I think you've heard in terms of impact, in terms of business, some of the concerns we get is, losing, patrons potentially to Virginia. So obviously the vaccine documentation verification has been lifted for now with the mask mandate until the end of the month. So really that's kind of been our major focus is on education. I think the one thing that's really helpful to highlight is as it relates to enforcement, our focus has really been more on what establishments can control and not to put a burden on them in terms of what they can't control. And what I mean by that is when we're talking about mask mandates, what we're talking about is wearing masks to come in, right? We don't try to play the gotcha police where somebody inside took a mask off. That's not really the issue. It's like, can you control your staff wearing masks? Can you control, patrons entering with masks? So that's kind of been the highlight, not to have a gotcha mentality or not to ding establishments for things that are outside their control. Because to your point, we don't want them getting in an argument with a patron who's taken their mask off while they're inside, right? So the focus has been really making sure that when they come in, they're wearing a mask, that they have signs posted about any terms of mask requirements, but not to put a burden on them on things that are outside their control. And I think you're on mute again.
Speaking of things that are outside of people's control or operators' control, staff, et cetera, can you share with the committee how many actions ABRA staff have taken in terms of enforcement against restaurant owners who are not complying with the district's mandates? And talk about the types of actions, if any, that have been taken.
Sure. We actually track a weekly spreadsheet, which we're happy to share with the committee. The spreadsheets vary, through different periods of the pandemic, depending on the rules that were in effect. The latest rules we had during the pandemic were the mask mandate that's valid till the end of the month, and then for the vaccine verification requirements. So in all but one case so far, the agency, as I mentioned, has done verbal warnings, written warnings for those type of requirements. We did have one summary suspension, which is currently in effect, where a liquor license was suspended for not complying with the requirements. But other than the one instance, it's been verbal and written warnings. So that's what we've had as relates to the mask mandate and the vaccine verification. Obviously, different periods of the reopening when we had limited hours, the inability to open indoors, there were, additional warnings and suspensions as a result of that.
And just the final minute that I have, if you could walk me through sort of what that process looks like, and in terms of the investigations and enforcement that you all are conducting, how are you hearing about these things? Are you all getting referrals? Are you just doing spot checks? Like, what does that process look like today? And how does that compare to some of the things that you were doing early on when the pandemic first set in 2020?
Sure. So enforcement takes effect through a couple different ways. One is we try to spot check, as many establishments as we can. So we just go out and check establishments, obviously trying to educate them, make sure they're aware of the requirements. And then two, through complaints to the hotline, social media, which we check. There's no shortage of individuals who will email the agency or call the hotline with regard to establishments that they believe are not enforcing the mask requirements, or at the time, the vaccine verification requirements. And then previously, if establishments were violating, the indoor dining prohibition restriction at the time, or hours restrictions, we'd get calls on that. So it's a combination of complaints, but we also on our own initiative go out to make sure that people are in compliance. And like I said, the goal is education. So with very, very few exceptions, once we talk to establishments about it, they're willing to comply and make an effort.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to my Ward 2 colleague, Councilmember Brooke Pinto, for a round. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Chairman McDuffie, and hi, Director Masali. Nice to see you. Thanks so much for your testimony. I want to start with a discussion around community engagement and inputs. I think there's been a lot of exciting developments, especially in the last couple of years, as we've been trying to help the hospitality industry that has really experienced devastating impacts from the pandemic. And there have been a desire from some neighbors to be more involved in the process. And so hopefully you can expand upon how ABRA solicits input from residents and ANCs when making decisions about new licenses.
Sure. Good to see you, Council Member. Thank you for that question. So obviously, as I mentioned in my testimony, we had a record number of individuals and members of the public that were trained this year and had training sessions. So that's obviously key. And then early in 21, we had well-attended training for all the ANC commissioners, for new commissioners. So critical to what we do is comment from ANCs, community associations, and the public. That's what makes this whole thing work, right? So if you're going to have the liquor license process we have to hear from the ANCs who are entitled to great weight, community associations, what have you. So what we do during the pandemic is all liquor license applications for new licensees were placarded for a 66-day public comment period. Now it's back to 45 days. We give notice to the Office Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. We give notice to the council. We post 2 placards that we make sure are visible. We publish in the DC Register. We are always available to attend community meetings. We have a wonderful community resource officer, Sarah Fashbaugh, who got a lot of praise today, and among other ABRA staff as well, who's available to assist ANCs and community organizations through the process. We try to make it, to the extent we can, as easy for them so they know what to expect. Obviously know what they can put in a settlement agreement, what can't be put in a settlement agreement. But we're always committed to doing what we ever can, because that's if you don't have community input from the ANCs and community organizations, you won't get buy-in in the process.
And to the extent that there are concerns or oppositions voiced to a particular license, can you speak about the protest process a little bit and how your office takes those concerns into account?
Sure. So the protest process, there's a couple things that can happen. So one, you can have a situation where a protest is filed, which I'll talk about. Then we have some instances where even before a protest is filed, the neighborhood, the ANC community organization will either reach a settlement agreement in advance, or they will reach an agreement with the applicant to amend their liquor license application. There may be an issue where there may only be an objection to later hours, or maybe a sidewalk cafe or a summer garden. So that can get resolved before the protest period ends, and the applicant can amend their application to address community concerns. In the event we have go to a protest, we have a roll call where parties are given standing. We require mediation for all cases. We try to amicably get the parties to work it out through mediation, which we have a mediator on board who's been with us a number of years, Laverne Fletcher, who does a great job. And if a settlement agreement isn't reached, then we can go to an evidentiary protest hearing where the parties are able to put on their case before the board. The board seeks information of what the parties want, right? So when we hear from the community what we're looking for, do they oppose the liquor license outright? Are they looking for certain conditions? What do they want the board to do, right? Do they want to cut the hours? Do they not want to give them a sidewalk cafe? Is there a trash issue? Or are they just against it because it's not an appropriate location for the neighborhood? So those are kind of some of the things that we want to hear. And then obviously, if we have a board order, a settlement agreement, it's critical that the terms of that agreement be enforced. Because if we're going to have individuals or ANCs or groups enter into a settlement agreement, then we need to make sure it's being enforced, because that's part of the trust of entering in the process as well.
And so in the event that an existing licensee is causing issues, what are the procedures that you all have in place to determine if the violator will face penalties or if they'll have their license revoked?
Sure. So let me kind of break this down, because I think it's important for because we get this question a lot for residents. And so we have obviously the liquor license protest process, where liquor licenses are all up every 3 years for protest. All on-premise licensees are all up this year for protest. So every restaurant, tavern, nightclub, restaurant, club, they're all up for protest this year, right? So ANC's community groups will have an opportunity to protest if they want any on-premise retailer licensee this year. In addition to that, though, we also have enforcement process, right? Where we can fine licensees for violation of the code, violations of the regulations, violations of settlement agreements and board orders. So when we look at penalties under the code, there's a primary tier schedule where you can have, if you have a first tier primary tier violation, there's a fine associated with that within 2 years. If you have, a second primary within, 2 years, there's a penalty schedule there. So we look at the schedule. And then by way of example, not going to mention specific names, but if you have like your fourth primary within 4 years, you're facing a penalty of $30,000 and a 30-day suspension served or revocation of your license. Fifth primary within 4 years is mandatory revocation. The board doesn't have any discretion. They have to revoke in those instances. So those don't happen very often, but you get to those type of situations, you can. And then we've had instances where the board has, denied licenses just for public health and safety issues, which we don't have to wait until we have 4 violations for those type of things. And then when we go to a protest hearing, the board can just not grant a license. So, you may have an instance where the board finds, based on community concerns, it's not appropriate location or it's not appropriate for the neighborhood, and they can just deny the license outright.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm out of time.
No problem.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. Director, as part of the process to apply, renew, or transfer a license, a prospective applicant must first obtain a clean hand certificate from the Office of Tax and Revenue within the Office of the Chief Financial Officer and a basic business license from DCRA. Since the public health emergency, many ABC licensees have been forced to operate on a limited capacity, and this has affected the overall financial health of their businesses. Has ABRA worked with OTR since the pandemic to assist businesses struggling to meet their tax obligations? For instance, have you all helped businesses with a payment plan, any deferment of fees or waiver, so that these businesses who otherwise would have paid their fees would not be denied a clean hand certificate from OTR?
Thank you, Chairperson McDuffie, for that question. Let me break it into 2 different parts. So on the fees aspect, we had delayed the due date for the payment of fees on multiple occasions. We were sensitive during the pandemic to give licensees additional time to pay without accruing any type of late fees, also giving them time until they were open and operating and making money before their license fee was due. So we had a number of initiatives on ABRA trying to be sensitive to helping businesses. And then working with you and Councilmember Pinto, as you know, we had the carry out and delivery program, which we kept free for a long time. And then obviously the streetery program has been free the whole time, in the pop-up program as well. So a lot of initiatives and those types to help licensees. In terms of working with the Office of Tax and Revenue, yes, we work with the Office of Tax and Revenue to try to address these tax issues early, to give time for licensees to try to come on a payment plan or some other type of arrangement with OTR. What we learned a long time ago is that if you don't give licensees enough time to try to work out issues or come to a payment plan with OTR, then they're faced, within a week or 2 of finding out of trying to work things out with OTR or close down. And those are not situations we want to have, right? You want to give the licensee as much time as possible to try to work things out with OTR to get on a payment plan or work out those type of issues. And so planning ahead, collaborating with OTR ahead of time has really helped in that instance.
Okay. And I want to take it back just briefly to talk a little bit about racial equity. And this has come up in the context of reopen and some other areas as well. So I want to throw this out to you and have you respond to it. But some of the requirements in obtaining an ABRA license in the code, 25-301, which I know like the back of your hand, it may act as an entry barrier for certain individuals, particularly in minority groups, to own ABC licenses. I'm going to share some of the provisions just for the benefit of folks who don't know the code as well as you do, and that's everybody. Subsection A1 requires that the applicant be of good character and generally fit for the responsibilities of the license. Paragraph 3A states, quote, the applicant has not been convicted of a felony in the 10 years before filing the application, close quote. Paragraph 4 states, quote, the applicant has not been convicted of any misdemeanor bearing on fitness for licensure in the 5 years before filing the application, close quote. And subsection B requires that the applicant cannot owe more than $100 in outstanding debt to the district in their tax returns. What are some of the steps that ABRA is taking or could take within the license application process to increase really diversity and ownership for licensees, especially as it relates to sit-down restaurants? This came up on a panel that I was on today, and I happened to be on that panel with Dr. Amber Hewitt and Dr. Brian McClure. who are the chief equity officers for the council and for the executive. So what are some of the steps that the agency can take within the application process to really try to increase diversity of ownership?
Great question, Chairperson McDuffie. Great question. So I think, as you know, I have 2 points. First is, as we worked with you and your office and the council on making it easier for individuals to own medical cannabis businesses and significantly reduce the types of felonies that prevent ownership, right, to not many left.
Mhm.
We need to have and look at doing that same standard for alcohol licenses, right? We can't say that the alcohol licensing standard is A, but for medical cannabis, it's going to be B. So obviously, we have significantly reduced, improved standard to allow more people to have ownership and work at establishments as it relates to medical cannabis. And so we need to look, once we hopefully finalize that language with the council, to apply that on the alcohol side, right? I mean, because I think, you know, our agencies of the view that should be the same. We shouldn't have two different standards. And so by doing that, that will allow more individuals to be eligible to work at alcohol establishments. It will allow more returning citizens to own alcohol establishments, which is what we all want. I think the other thing I do want to highlight, which I know you deserve credit for, but if you look at the Corps' racial equity assessment of the Reopen DC bill, it really provides a framework of where additional work is needed, you know, where we can take next steps. One is this area you just mentioned. Two is steps we can take to attract additional restaurants to Ward 7 and 8. Also take advantage of potentially additional outdoor open spaces in 7 and 8. So, you know, for individuals, you could get a chance to read the racial equity impact assessment for Reopen DC. It's really helpful in terms of a pathway moving forward. But as it relates to 25301, we'd love to work with the council to amend 301 to be more in line with allowing more returning citizens to work at and own alcohol establishments in line with language that would be similar to what's being established for medical cannabis applicants.
Okay. And I might run a little over my time, but you mentioned medical cannabis, and I know you talked a little bit about it in your opening. So let me just try to go down a really quick line of questions, because I have gotten some concerns raised from people who have an interest in the cannabis industry and the current licenses that are pending. And I understand that the agency has communicated a 5-day turnaround on answers to applicants' questions. And some folks have said that you all have not been able to really meet that time frame. Are you all having any challenges with meeting that time frame? And you know, do you expect that that's going to have any bearing if you think it's going to affect the applicant's ability to respond to the requirements that you all have laid out?
Thanks, council member. Yeah, I expect all the questions to be answered by this week. So we had three responses posted Monday, 3 on Friday. We've been churning them out. I expect everything that we've received to be posted this week.
Okay, and then I'm also hearing concerns about sort of a shortage in locations for cultivation centers. In part because of the moratorium, and also, though, I'm hearing in part because of the zoning designation, which is MU4 restriction. Can you talk about whether or not you are hearing those concerns too within your office?
So yeah, so I think one of the concerns we've heard is obviously a lot of the manufacturing area in the city is in Ward 5, and so you know we have no problem working with your office in terms of the current cap that's in place in Ward 5. As you know, there's a cap on 6. So we don't have any problem with that, that if the council chooses to lift that cap, we have no problem with that.
Okay.
I think the concern we have is just changing the rules midstream on an open application period that closes March 28th. But after that, we don't have any problem working with the council on making changes to the cap, whether it's in permanent medical cannabis legislation or another form.
Okay. Yeah, I know one of the things I've heard is just in terms of like trying to produce enough yields as a cultivation, cannabis cultivator, you've got to have this sort of minimum square footage requirements. And I'm not an expert on this. I'm sure you've heard it from people. It's about 15,000 square feet. And just knowing how limited those types of buildings are in the district, generally speaking, it seems to be restricting the areas where the availability to get that sort of square footage is making it challenging with the caps in place. And so the council will be looking at that, and hopefully we can have the agency support. I know that you'd already put the LOI out, and now the application is out there. But as I understand it, it restricted everybody from even considering Ward 5. So in terms of the playing field being leveled, if we were to lift the cap, then everybody similarly would have the opportunity if they wanted to pursue a facility in Ward 5. But then let me just, and then I'm gonna make sure my colleague has more time for her round, certainly. But I want to stay on this line of question while I have it. As I read the LOI when it was out, my understanding, and what I've also heard from some folks who had an interest, is that the ABRA only required the applicants to provide an LOI, a letter of intent, to demonstrate that they have, people who are interested in cultivation centers have secured real estate. Is that correct? They only need to show an LOI with a place in order to be responsive in their interests?
So just to respond, Chairperson McDuffie, during the letter of intent process, there was no location requirement. So the location requirement comes during the open application period that's currently underway. You need an address now, but to file a letter of intent, you did not need an address.
Got it. So in the application process that's open right now, what do they have to show? Do they have to show a signed lease or just an LOI with a facility?
They either need a letter of intent to lease, a signed lease, own a building. They can have a conditional lease or a letter of intent. That's fine.
Right. So what I'm hearing is, and I don't know this to be the case, but I've heard it from a couple of folks, even just for something like an LOI, which is not a signed lease necessarily. What I'm hearing is that the owners, knowing that ABRA requires this, like the building owners, the real estate owners, are taking advantage of this by charging some pretty high holding costs, which are really exceeding the normal rental rates that people would otherwise pay. And so this issue seems to be exacerbating the scarcity of space, especially as it relates to MU4 facilities that are already limited in their availability. Have you heard this concern?
Yes, I think just to clarify what the issue is because of the cap in Ward 5, where most of the manufacturing area is, you have limited manufacturing area, which is pretty much, other than Ward 5, it's pretty much all in most of it's all in Ward 4 and Ward 7. So you only have limited land in 4 and 7 that's available. And clearly you have a number of, potential applicants, with limited land in 4 and 7, right? The bulk of the manufacturing land is in 5. And that's why we support working with you to lift the cap or modify the cap in some fashion, because we think it's important, to be able to allow for additional cultivation centers in Ward 5.
Okay.
Our only issue is just continuing to change the rules on the current process. But we support, working with you this year to lift the cap on Ward 5 or modify it somehow.
Okay. All right. My apologies to Councilmember Pinto. I know I went over. I think I've sort of asked a lot of questions I wanted to ask. Hopefully I don't have to come back to it, but I'm going to turn to you and staff, please. Let's make sure Councilmember Pinto gets the appropriate amount of time. I think I went 6 minutes over, so at least a 13
Don't
minute.
worry about that, Chairman. I won't need that much time.
Okay,
I have a couple more questions.
Okay, sure.
And I'm glad I was able to hear that discussion, because that capping issue continues to be really important. I wanted to ask you, Director, about the settlement process for streeteries. And so one of the pieces that is included in the reopen bill was for these summer patio gardens, which have a different notification process under the theory that these restaurants need to move quickly and DDOT needs to move quickly. But as we head into permanent legislation or permanent considerations of some of these outdoor spaces, what is your view on if those summer garden settlement processes should be standardized for indoor and outdoor dining?
I'm going to take a stab at your question. If I didn't understand it correctly, feel free to correct me. So as it relates to if in the event we get to a point where streeters are permanent, we want to make sure that there's notice given to the ANC and the public, right? So, we have in the reopened DC bill, streeteries through 23. And obviously, as you know, the bill requires us to give notice to the Office Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. If we were to make streeteries public, we'd want to have a placard period. We'd want to give notice to ANCs, community organizations, put that in the register, right? So I think that's good. Obviously DDOT may have their own public notification process, which is fine. And then clearly now, because all the liquor licenses are up for renewal this year for existing streeteries, obviously that gives the community an opportunity to weigh in. So I think that's helpful. So I don't know if that helps. Clearly different ANCs are going to have certain expectations or standardized language potentially of what they're going to want to see for streeteries in their neighborhood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. And I think for in the interim time period, to at least have the ANCs have notice when these new streeters are coming will hopefully help in the success of the new restaurants and outdoor restaurants, and also allow for resident input through their commissioners.
Yeah, absolutely. If streeteries are going to be, past 23, there's got to be a more comprehensive public notice process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a little bit outside of your wheelhouse, because it's precisely a question about businesses that are not selling alcohol. But in the context of this as a performance oversight hearing, there have been more and more businesses that we've been made aware of that are not licensed, and that are not licensed because they're not selling alcohol, but are engaged in late night activity, either people bringing in their own alcohol, or somehow just kind of congregating. And as we and the committee think about possible solutions to address this problem, one of the possible route paths is just having every business be at least regulated under DCRA, and having a more robust enforcement mechanism included in that process. I just wanted to, I guess I can frame it as, has that been an issue that ABRA has been experiencing this year, or have had any involvement in?
So what I would say, council member, is one of the reasons we're on the forefront of what we do, is because we're out at night. We work 7 nights a week, 7 nights a week till 4 a.m. We're out. And so other agencies may not be out in the evening as often or work nights. And so a lot of these issues you can only find if you're out at night, right? I mean, I'm in the Reef Center right now. The Reef Center right now compared to Friday, Saturday night in terms of, the 14th and U corridor, it's not the same as it is, on a Friday, Saturday night. And so, it's really important to be out at night. And so we do, whether it's DCRA, DC Health, if there are incidents that we're aware of, we'll reach out to them and they'll work with us to, to go out at night. But when you're out at night, 7 nights a week, that's where you find things, and you get your hotline calls and your complaints, and you're able to find things, if that helps. We're not, as heavily involved in how robust our nightlife is. We're not a 9-to-5 city, and so we're a city where things are occurring all the time, and so the agencies have to be out and available all the time if you're going to get that type of enforcement. Because if you're going to have a regulatory environment, then you're going to have to actually be regulating at evening and nights. Because if the industry knows you're not out at nights, then they know they can do things because there's no one to enforce it.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I think that's very well said, which is why I kind of framed this at the beginning as it's currently a little bit outside your wheelhouse, because not all businesses are selling alcohol. But maybe they should be within the ABRA jurisdiction, in part because of what you're describing as the enforcement limitations of other agencies.
I'll leave that there, but yes, thank you.
Okay, fair enough. So how often are you all collaborating with the Office of Nightlife and Culture?
A fair amount. We work collaboratively on a number of issues because really that's how we actually make progress on a number of fronts. So what their office offers that's invaluable is they have the ability to collaborate on issues, and bring all the district agencies together. I'm just going to give you a couple examples, right? So streeteries highlight so many different agencies. You have, during the winter, right, which I know you're a big fan of, year-long streeteries, which we all are, but you have some heating issues, right? So you need to make sure we have agreement on heating issues. We have to make sure we have agreement in terms of tents. What are the appropriate tents that can be put up? How do we deal with making sure streeteries are ADA accessible, right? So the advantage their office has is they have the ability to bring agencies together to problem solve on nightlife type issues. And then obviously we try to innovate here at ABRA, and so they're able to help us in terms of innovating with other agencies to make sure that what we're doing allows businesses to succeed and do well. At the same time, we regulate them in a manner that's reasonable and makes sense.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all you do in this crazy year, and to all of your regulators and all of ABRA staff as well. I really appreciate all that you're doing. Chairman McDuffie, I don't know if you're here, but I don't need all the extra time. But thank you for it.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. I was indeed listening, just trying to multitask. So thank you for that. Let me, I still have a few more questions, Director Musali. And so let me resume where I left off. I was asking about cannabis, and I think let me go to my questions. Let me ask this question. I think I answered part A of that question. If you can talk about how the medical dispensaries are faring during the pandemic, and talk about how much, in terms of sales, they've generated compared to the time last year, as well as maybe 2020. I've heard different numbers. I've heard different levels of concern about how business is going. I've heard, and this is primarily in the context of that gray market, or if you want to call it a black market, but some of the folks who are referred to as Initiative 71 businesses. Give us a sense of how those things are going. Also discuss how the increased medical cannabis quantity limit from 4 ounces to 8 ounces may have affected sales for medical.
Great question, council member. Thank you for that question. Let me break it down into 2 areas, kind of how I see it. So in terms of comparison of sales, we're on pace to have a record number of sales for FY22 compared to FY21. So medical cannabis sales at dispensaries for 21 were higher than 20, and 22 will be higher than 21. So I'll just give you an example. You can take January, December, what have you. We'll just start with December. So December cannabis sales for dispensaries were the highest they'd ever been for the month of December compared to any other December. And then if you take all the months we've ever had, it was the 4th highest for a month, the 4th highest medical cannabis sales ever, but the highest ever for the month of January, for December. For January, we had the highest dispensary sales ever for the month of January. On February, we're on track to have the highest amount of sales for the month of February. Okay, so with the program as it relates to the medical cannabis sales for the year is going higher, just like 21 was higher than 20. And obviously, thanks to the council, there's actions you've taken in terms of giving us a 2-year card, which is currently free. We have our senior week where 65 people 65 and older can self-certify, which has done really well today and yesterday. So I think when you look at the sales compared to other years, they're doing as well as they've ever done, and they will be higher this year than they were compared to other years. So, and then the other thing we're trying to do, I think we mentioned, we have, probably the top reciprocity program in terms of letting out-of-state people come and buy it at dispensaries in the country. So that really helps the dispensaries. And so one of our focuses is increasing the number of district residents in the program, which over the last several months, we've added 800 new DC residents into the program. And that's why I mentioned the importance of the Turnaround Thursday program, because what happens like today, yesterday, and on Thursdays, and we're over 1,000 people taking advantage of this program now, is they come in and they get their card that day. So they get a digital and electric card that day. And then for individuals filing their cards online, the goal, which we majority have done, is we try to get all cards issued within 7 business days in terms of being mailed out. That's the goal. And then obviously through the legislation that we have, anybody who had an expired card on or after March 2020 can continue to buy. So that's kind of where the medical program is in terms of it's doing better in terms of sales than it's ever done. Now, when you look at that, we have 7 dispensaries, right? So some dispensaries are doing better than they've ever done with record sales. Some are doing about the same, and then some are doing a little worse, right? So within that, you have that framework. But overall, we're on a path of trajectory where revenues each year in terms of sales are going up. And we're happy to provide, the committee, with reports. I think we've sent some of these sales numbers to the committee. But the second issue that's going on here, with the other side of this is because we have these unlicensed businesses operating that are competition, they don't have the same requirements. They're operating more of an adult cannabis sales environment where you don't need a card, you don't need to self-certify, you need a license, you're just kind of operating. So I think from a competition point of view, you have this dynamic where you have unlicensed businesses that are operating, and then other businesses that have to jump through these hoops, even though it's a medical program. And there's an aspect of fairness to that where people are paying taxes, potentially, some may not, in terms of unlicensed. And they're having to meet all these requirements of ABRA, have card holders, and then you have these unlicensed businesses that don't have to meet these same requirements. And so from a level playing field, that's where we are, at least until we see what happens with adult cannabis sales. And obviously we're happy to work with the council on potential other changes to rectify that issue.
I appreciate that. And you talked a little bit earlier about the emergency legislation that the council adopted earlier this month that would allow medical cannabis patients that are 65 years of age or older to temporarily self-certify. And I know it's early, but what type of response or reaction do you think, or if you've gotten any already, let me know how that's going. And I've also heard conversations about the age. People have said the age should be younger, lower than 65. If you don't have any initial response, that's fine. But if you care to provide any comment about that, then I'm open ears.
Sure. So with Senior Week, I obviously have been here, so I didn't check the end of the day, but we started it yesterday. And as of the last time I checked today, we had over 100 people. I stopped at 100. It's over 100, but we had over 100 people. The majority of which were 65 and older that came down either yesterday or today. Who got issued cards yesterday or today. in the program. So I think one of the really encouraging things about the last 2 days is that the individuals coming down, the majority of which are 65 and older, are new patients. They're individuals that have never been in this program before. So they've really taken to being able to self-certify. We had, I think, Tuesday, I think somebody was down here at whatever, one of the days they were down here at, 8:30 when we opened, just ready to sign up and self-certify. So, but I think the last 2 days, like I said, I don't know about the end of the day, but we were over 100 people just from today and yesterday that signed up. And those 100 people or more, they all got issued their card either the day they came yesterday or today. And so that's pretty good. Obviously, we have that going 2 more days. The tax holiday for the 10-day tax holiday period is really going to help because people are going to want to register and get their card to take advantage of the 10-day sales tax holiday in April. But thus far, the 65 and older self-certification is going well. And we're happy to, continue to have conversations with the council about, the age potentially being 21.
Right. You were talking about, at some point, maybe we'll get around to the recreational use program. I don't think the folks who are helping us out by cleaning our offices are used to us being here this late. So pardon that disruption. You were talking about the possibly being the recreational program, and obviously we would have to wait to see what happens on Capitol Hill for that. But there are also concerns. You were laying out some of the concerns that the folks in the medical program have with the gray market, black market. And I'll note that one of the additional things that are requirements of people who have a license to operate medical cannabis is that they have to pay taxes, and the folks who are in that gray market do not have to pay taxes. But just how do we fundamentally distinguish between medical and adult cannabis recreational? And I guess the question I'm asking is, as we continue to try to make some modifications around the medical program to make sure that people who need it are able to access it, particularly during the pandemic. And I'm asking that question on the heels of the response you gave to the emergency that we moved earlier this month that we talked about.
Sure. So, clearly when we get to a point where hopefully we have adult cannabis sales and medical cannabis, one of the things we're going to have to look at, which we've studied and looked at best practices in other jurisdictions, is there's going to have to be a distinction in the programs, because if there's not, then you're not going to have individuals in the medical cannabis program. So what other states have done, which I think you mentioned with the 8 ounces, is in other states you can buy more like 8 ounces compared to maybe 2 ounces or an ounce compared to the adult cannabis program in the States. So that's one thing they do. Obviously, the tax rates differ. In some states, there's no tax on medical cannabis compared to a tax that's paid for adult cannabis sales. So that's one thing we'd look at. And then, obviously, with one of the advantages potentially, which we'd have to have a conversation with medical, is the value of having, a patient go to a healthcare provider at some point, whether it's a year or 2 years or whatever, at some point. And then for, edibles and others, there's, different concentration levels of THC that are permitted for medical. But those states that have really made a distinction, their medical cannabis programs have, for the most part, thrived. Other jurisdictions, their medical cannabis registration numbers have decreased. But the other component of this, as we look at this, which we'll have to deal with, is how to deal with the gray market. Because just because you have an adult cannabis program doesn't mean the gray market goes away. If you look at California, where they have adult cannabis sales, they still have a huge gray market issue because they have high taxes on adult cannabis sales. So because of the high taxes and other issues that they have, they still have a thriving gray market. So Just because you have an adult cannabis program doesn't, mean that the unlicensed market's just going to go away.
And
So
go ahead.
the one thing that's probably worth reading, if you haven't, I can send it to you. But the Minority Cannabis Business Association in February, they put out a national equity report in terms of why a number of jurisdictions that have laws that look great on paper for social equity don't work. And it's really a good read because it really highlights, if you're actually going to have a successful equity program, it highlights a number of things that need to happen. And so, one of the things that's worth mentioning, and I'm not trying to deal that with this because we have a open period, but as we look at adult cannabis licensing, one of the things they do, because of the lease and location issue you brought, is they'll conditionally approve someone for a license and give them time to find a location. So that way they have the license and then they can hopefully get funding, and then they have time to look for a location. And because obviously it's much easier to look for a location when you've been approved for a license versus, speculatively, you don't know whether you have it or not.
Is that location requirement like the one that I guess is the round that's open right now? Is that something that you all require because of the law? Is that something that you all require as a matter of business with ABRA and this application?
Well, it's a requirement now because when it's in the regulations.
I'm sorry, but I will note that you were talking about the adult recreational, not
yes,
medical. So
yes. So for medical cannabis, we have it when it's in the regulations. 2, we have a scoring process. I don't want to get too into adult cannabis. I think if we had adult cannabis, we would talk about other ways to achieve social equity versus doing a scoring manner. But because we're scoring applications, part of the scoring process is based on the location, right? The convenience of the location and factors related to the location. Whereas if you didn't have a scoring criteria for social equity applicants, we could conceivably look at, changing the location requirement for adult cannabis sales.
Right. I appreciate you making that distinction. It does begs the question, just whether this round that's open is the best way to make sure that folks, particularly social equity applicants, are able to have an opportunity. But I'll leave that there. Let me ask, just to go back to what the current practices now, but do practitioners still have to rely on DOH recommendation form to provide patients with a recommendation or referral for medical cannabis treatment?
No, that's done all through ABRA right now. We have that, and the number of healthcare practitioners has increased since we took over the program.
So if I'm a new practitioner to the DC area, to DC specifically, what do I have to do to register to provide medical cannabis recommendations or referrals to my patients?
Yeah, we have a process where you can just register with ABRA. I don't have that form up right now, but we have a form you fill out. It's a very easy process.
And it's all done online?
You can do it online, yes.
Okay. I appreciate that. And then if you could provide us with an update on the district opening up a testing lab. How soon would the testing lab be opening, and how many applications have you all received expressing interest in obtaining a testing lab license in this application cycle, and also discuss when the application period opened and when it's going to be closing?
Sure. So we're obviously eager to get a testing lab up and running. That's obviously one of our critical goals. So during the letter of intent period, top of my head, it was either 15 or 16 letters of intent for testing labs for two testing labs. So we have about 15 or so potential letter of intents for 2 testing labs. Thanks to the work of yourself and the rest of the council, testing labs are allowed now to operate in Ward 5. Mm-hmm. So we thank you for that, because without that legislation, they wouldn't have been able to operate in Ward 5. So there's been significant interest in opening a testing lab. As part of the questions we've gotten, as part of the process, we've gotten testing application related questions, which we've been answering. So the current application period, which started, I think, around November 29th, closes on March 28th. So hopefully by March 28th, we will have applications from some or all of the letter of intent testing lab applicants.
Okay, and this one last question or thought around the practitioner questions that I was asking a moment ago. But so why can't there simply be a process where any practitioner in the District of Columbia provide a recommendation or referral without, why do they have to go through ABRA in order to provide that to somebody in need of medical cannabis?
Sure. So from a regulatory tracking process, we have, in terms of regulating what's going on, that's why we have it. We use metric where we track what patients can purchase, and then we have a licensing system where we can track things on a licensing perspective. So obviously through the self-certification process, individuals 65 years and older don't currently need a healthcare provider on an emergency basis. The other advantage of the card, really, there's two main issues. One is, if we're going to have a medical program, it needs to be regulated and tracked. So that's one of our main issues. Two, we have a number of patients that want a card because the card allows them to get reciprocity in other jurisdictions. And so by getting a card, you can use that in another jurisdiction. But our main issue is making sure that we're able to license and regulate what's going on in tracking sales and purchases of DC residents.
Okay. Let me see what I just picked up. My staff had the opportunity to review the applications for a medical cannabis center, and since the medical cannabis program was transferred to ABRA, I've really worked very closely with you to advance social equity within the program. The questions on the application appear to be a standard business application. However, from a social equity lens, certain minority groups may need additional assistance to complete a successful application. Being that the medical cannabis licenses are very competitive, what kind of collaboration efforts does the agency have with DSLBD to provide training or any technical assistance to prospective applicants? And how is, if at all, DSLBD utilized the $300,000 that was included in their budget to support social equity applicants before ABRA?
There's a lot of questions in there, council member. I'll try to break those apart. With regard to the $300,000, DSLBD has had some information sessions with stakeholders. And then probably most importantly, in March, they're looking at putting out innovation grants. So they'll be putting out a opportunity for applicants to apply for innovation grants in March. So we're looking forward to that. Mm-hmm. As it relates to the application process, we've been working collaboratively with DSLBD, having conversations with them about helping applicants. We are looking at potentially very soon, well before the end of the application period ending, putting together another training session that DSLBD would put together to help applicants, well before the application period closes.
Okay. And with on-premises licenses now allowed to sell alcohol for off-premises consumption, if a meal is purchased, please provide an update on the success of the program and how many on-premises licensees have registered to take advantage of the carry-out privileges.
So there's approximately 823 restaurants, hotels, on-premise establishments with an alcohol carry-out and delivery endorsement, which is pretty similar to what we had during the pandemic. So that's been something that licensees have continued to do. That's been very successful and positive. I've seen, I think you mentioned in terms of during the winter, some restaurants, tweeting out that, 25% of their business was related to carry out. So I think that's a huge component during the pandemic of helping businesses survive.
Okay. And and hopefully you haven't answered this. I mean to be redundant given how much time we have left, but just in terms of how you all ensure that on-premises licensees are taking in orders and making deliveries on alcohol with food purchases. What kinds of things are you doing?
Sure. So what we do is, the good thing is we have a carryout aspect to this. So the investigator will monitor and observe undercover whether the establishment is checking the ID as part of the carryout delivery. Is there a food purchase, right? So we making sure that they're actually selling a food item and that they're actually checking the ID and making sure that the individual purchasing alcohol is 21 years of older, right? So that's, one of the primary ways we check. We have been working and talking and looking at guidance from Virginia and other jurisdictions on the delivery end, because there's opportunities which we've done in the past and other states do for making sure that deliveries that the individuals are 21 years and old and checking the IDs. The Reopen DC bill, which creates the third-party delivery license, has a number of criteria for checking that we intend to enforce. So we think that's going to be valuable too in terms of making sure that the third-party delivery companies are checking IDs.
Thank you for that. Let me go back to the last response you gave about the innovation grants. When are those innovation grants going to be available?
What was represented at one of the stakeholder meetings we had in the discussions is they were going to be made available in March.
Okay, so in March means one of the however many days, it's 31 days in March. One of the 31 days in March, there's going to be a grant available. When does the application period close?
We're having a meeting coming up with DSLBD. I can get more information, provide the committee. That's the information I have so far.
What about the application period though for you all for the 5 licenses?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. The application for a period for us closes March 28th.
So your application period closes March 28th. Their application closes in March, which could be March 1st or could be March 31st.
Their application period hasn't started. It's going to start in March.
So it's going to start in March, which means the application period for you all closes before the innovation grants are even going to be available.
That's very possible.
It's more than possible. It's actually very likely. That we got to work on that because yeah, let's work on that. And I appreciate your candor around that. Yeah, I appreciate that because we need DSLBD to really get a move on with that because obviously the goal is apparent, and it seems like there might not be any use for applicants for that money if at least for this round, if it closes on the 28th and the application might not even be available until next month, let alone when it closes and when the funds will be available. So,
and I'll follow up with them on that as well.
Okay, let me give me a moment to see if I have anything else I want to ask before we transition to our final agency. Okay, looks like I've asked the questions that I want to ask now. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the record before we transition to our final agency?
I just want to thank you and your staff for working with us on the Reopen DC bill and in the various medical cannabis emergencies, really helping to make a big difference for district residents and our businesses. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Musali, and thank you, your team, for all the work that you all do. Look forward to following up on just a couple of items that came up during this hearing.
Thank you. Bye.
Finally, we have our last agency, the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture. On October 2nd, 2018, the council passed the Office and Commission of Nightlife Establishment Act of 2018, which created the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture. The chief responsibility of the new office was to serve as a central point of contact between the district and businesses that make up the nighttime economy. Since its creation, the duties of the office have expanded to include providing training for nightlife businesses that promote public safety and security for patrons during the nighttime hours, collaborating with the District Department of Transportation and the Office of Planning to increase public transportation accessibility during the nighttime hours, and meeting regularly with the public to address concerns regarding laws and regulations that affect nighttime economy. The office has also played a key role to nighttime businesses and patrons since the mayor's public health emergency declaration on March 20th, 2020. The office has served as the administrator of the Streetery Winter Ready grant program and works very closely with the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development to assist struggling nighttime businesses with grant programs and resources. And so last but certainly not least, we are joined by the director of the Office of Nightlife and Culture. And I'll note that we are still with Ward 2 Councilmember Brooke Pinto, who's been going strong with us all day. We're going to turn to Director Vandernat to see if you have a statement. And welcome. It's good to see you. I think it's your first time appearing before the committee.
Yes.
We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. So, now it's safe to say good evening, Chairman McDuffie, members of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, council staff, and the residents of Washington, D.C. My name is Solana Vandernat, Director of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, and I am honored to discuss the work of our office in FY21 and the start of FY22. Monk serves as an intermediary between nightlife establishments and venues and the district government with the goal of promoting a safe, economically, and culturally vibrant nighttime economy. As this industry recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic, Monk is committed and focused on engaging our constituents. I would first like to thank Mayor Muriel Bowser for her continued support of the office, as well as for recognizing the economic, social, and cultural impact that nightlife and culture have on Washington, D.C. Thank you, Chairman McDuffie, for your leadership on the Committee on Business and Economic Development. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues within the Bowser administration to find new ways to support the bigger and better return of our thriving nightlife and culture scene. Furthermore, I want to acknowledge the leadership and work of my predecessor, Sean Townsend. Monk is committed to engaging stakeholders in the nightlife industry by conducting outreach, providing assistance, and resolving nightlife-related issues by collaborating with district government agencies. We also educate nightlife establishments on existing district policies and regulations through comprehensive trainings. Monk's collective actions support Mayor Bowser's priority of creating a safe and economically vibrant nighttime economy, and I am proud of the positive strides that our team has made in key programmatic areas. Although FY21 was a year of transition for the nightlife and hospitality community as they continued to navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic, Monk listened to their challenges and provided the resources and programs that were necessary to get through the pandemic. Most notably, our office participated in town halls with the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development to address important policy changes related to public health and safety, conducted valuable outreach that supported the establishment of the Bridge Fund for restaurants, and forged critical partnerships with local businesses to ensure vaccines were available for industry workers. In October 2020, Monk partnered with Ace Hardware and Home Depot to procure 250 heaters that were distributed to establishments through the business improvement districts to support city streeteries. From December 2020 to June 2021, Monk supported hospitality and healthcare workers through various initiatives in concert with local organizations and businesses, distributing free meals to members of these communities. In total, one such initiative provided about 10,000 meals to hospitality and healthcare employees affected by the pandemic. In January 2021, Monk supported the distribution of personal protective equipment and to streetery grant recipients, working with the Offices of Contracting and Procurement to procure masks and hand sanitizer. Monk compiled packages of PPE and hand sanitizer for distribution to our hospitality industry in need. Last January, we also supported one of Mayor Bowser's flagship initiatives, the Bridge Fund. Monk worked collaboratively with DEMPED to help establish the grant criteria for restaurant and entertainment bridge funds. Additionally, Monk worked with multiple agencies to conduct outreach to eligible participants and shutter local music venues. As the district entered phase 1 of reopening, Monk targeted locations across the city to ensure that underserved communities impacted most by the pandemic were being prioritized for vaccine outreach. For example, Monk, in partnership with DC Health, Atlas Brewworks, MLK Deli, and EXO, hosted vaccination pop-ups at MLK Deli and Sandlot Southeast. In February 2021, Monk assisted the Anacostia bid with agency support and logistics centered around the Art to Go-Go program, which encourages people to visit and support Anacostia's small businesses and cultural arts community. This community is the cornerstone of Anacostia and what makes it a great place to live and visit. Monk also worked with Anacostia Bid and Dempit to establish the first streeteries in Ward 8. Additionally, we were able to distribute PPE and work with DDOT to provide concrete barriers to provide safety for the streeteries. In March 2021, Monk supported local businesses through the propane refuel operation that provided free propane tank refills to restaurants with outdoor dining facilities. From May to June 2021, Monk launched an innovative summer initiative that created the Vaccination Giveaway Partnership with the DC nightlife industry in an effort to vaccinate DC residents. We partnered with 8 of the most iconic and accessible local venues to get DC residents vaccinated while they enjoyed a beer, including The Reach at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and the 930 Club. We also promoted these important resources at Black Lives Matter Plaza during its 1-year anniversary celebration on June 5th. Last June, Monk also partnered with DC Health, Dempit, and RIMW to host a job fair that included more than 50 restaurants looking to hire industry workers. Then in July, Monk assisted the National Cherry Blossom Festival with securing locations where local artists could display their artwork and sculptures across all 8 wards, with the first sculpture installation location being in Ward 8 at the district's Entertainment and Sports Arena. We amplified this campaign on our social media platforms, which showcase the diversity of the creative community and the beauty of the city's landscapes. Just 2 years ago, Monk celebrated the announcement of Go-Go as the official music of DC, an effort that was prompted by your legislation, Mr. Chairman. We hope to continue to work closely with you and this committee to advance other efforts that reinforce the importance of DC's nightlife and cultural contributions to the city's rich legacy and future economic growth. Specifically, we greatly appreciate your collaboration on the Reopen DC initiative, which includes important provisions aimed at boosting the district's economic recovery, removing hurdles to launching and growing businesses, addressing food deserts, and creating opportunities to engage and attract residents and visitors. This initiative will help advance Mayor Bowser's priorities of bringing people back to work, customers back to restaurants, and the vibrancy back to the city's nightlife corridors. Since the start of FY22, Monk has already participated in nearly 100 community engagements and continues to actively meet with key constituents to obtain a better understanding of local conditions, current challenges, and exploring areas for improvement. Monk was present when Mayor Bowser launched the 4th annual DMV Black Restaurant Week, where she announced continued commitment to equity, opportunities, and growth for new Ward 7 and 8 establishments via the $58 million Food Access Fund. Monk will provide technical assistance to business operators and will continue to work with other agencies to ensure grants are inclusive of the food, retail, and hospitality industries across the district. The Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture has been intentional and consistent about engaging underrepresented communities, including immigrant-owned business operators and staff, the LGBTQ+ nightlife community, and women-owned businesses to underscore the administration's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. For Monk in practice, that means making sure people of color and historically underrepresented businesses know about Mayor Bowser's investment of $40 million in the Bridge Fund to provide financial support to sectors that have experienced financial losses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Monk works tirelessly to ensure that the district's economy continues its path to recovery, which only happens when these businesses are given a fair shot. We continue to raise awareness about financial relief opportunities and provide guidance to ensure that all businesses are in compliance with applicable district laws so that they may remain eligible to apply. Furthermore, we will continue to explore more opportunities to work on racial equity issues with both the Mayor's Office on Racial Equity. Our office is actively engaged in planning for the upcoming Responsible Hospitality Institute's Sociable Summit City Summit here in Washington, D.C. in April in order to stay abreast of the latest best practices for planning and managing hospitality zones that create safe, vibrant, and economically prosperous places to socialize. In closing, I would like to thank my team for their hard work and dedication to the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture. I would also like to thank the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, DC Health, the Alcoholic Beverage Regulation Administration, the District Department of Transportation, and the Fire Marshal's Office for working diligently to ensure that the government continues to think outside of the box to provide relief and assistance to businesses. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank the nightlife community for all of the sacrifices they've made for their staff, neighbors, and visitors since the start of the pandemic, but especially in the past year. Under Mayor Bowser's leadership, Monk will remain steadfast in its commitment to the endurance and revival of the nighttime economy. I look forward to the challenges ahead, and I'm confident that working together, we will build a more equitable, resilient, and thriving nighttime economy. Chairman McDuffie, I would like to thank you and the rest of the committee for your continued support, and I appreciate the opportunity to share the progress of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture. This concludes my testimony, and I welcome any questions you have at this time.
Thank you for your testimony, Director. Let me begin, as I have with many of the agencies that have appeared before the committee, and just ask you how you and your team are doing in terms of morale. We are coming up on almost the 2-year anniversary of when the mayor put in effect the public health emergency, and so we want to get a sense of how things are working with you, particularly given the industries that you interact with and your team interacts with are those that have been most impacted and almost immediately impacted once the pandemic set in. So how's morale going with you and your team?
Well, thank you for asking, Chairman, and we are doing well. And as I've told everybody that I've spoken to, not just the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, but the nightlife and hospitality community is resilient and strong, and we continue to take it one day at a time, and we do our best.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I know I mentioned earlier that this is the first time you are appearing before the committee in your role as director of the office. And I must admit that you came at such an extraordinarily important time in the district with the hospitality industry really still reeling from the effects of the pandemic. So talk a little bit about just some of your background and experience in general as director since you've assumed the role last year in November.
So background about myself, I have over 11 years of experience in the nightlife industry. I started off in 2010 as an assistant manager for DT Nation, which is a promotional event planning company here in the district. And I worked my way up to be the director of operations. And then in 2016, I created my own business, Soul Support, which created an event planning, project management, and all those here under the nightlife industry solutions for businesses. And when I started this company, that's when I got the opportunity to work with various DC government agencies. We are able to help our clients navigate through how to obtain a basic business license, ABRA, how to obtain an ABRA license, how to become a CBE certified business. And also during the pandemic, we were also given the opportunity to help our clients navigate through the small business micro recovery grant funds, the bridge funds, and also helping the employees navigate through the unemployment process. I've also was a ABRA licensed manager for, I'd say about almost 6 years for various nightlife establishments. And that's when I got the opportunity to closely work with ABRA and the MPD to ensure the safety of the establishment's patrons, staff, and neighbors. And during the pandemic as well, I was able to navigate, to pivot to the nonprofit industry where I was the program manager for Hook Hall Helps. And I created the execution, the distribution of nearly 10,000 meals and supply kits to over 3,100 nighttime economy workers who were affected by the pandemic. So I look at this position as a, as a culmination of 11 years of knowledge, experience, and relationships in the nightlife and hospitality community.
Really solid experience, and really appreciate that. It sounds like you have immersed yourself into the work, as I imagine the folks who you work with in the industries so appreciate. I was looking at some of the responses you provided to the committee pre-hearing, and I appreciate you providing those responses. You all estimate that approximately 54% of DC's nightlife workers live outside the district but commute into the district for work. Given that number that you all provided, do you have any thoughts on whether the vaccine or mask mandates may be affecting restaurant owners and their ability to hire or retain nightlife workers? What are you hearing from folks who work in that industry?
Yeah, so what we are hearing is that the vaccination requirement that, well, as we know, that was put in place to keep our community safe and to use as a way to combat the spread of COVID, particularly the Omicron variant. And as far as getting the nightlife industry workers back, we are working on creating programs to incentivize their return to work.
Well, thank you for that. And then, when you look at how we're faring in the District of Columbia, what are you seeing compared to our neighbors in Virginia and Maryland in terms of nightlife economy?
As terms of the nightlife economy, as we all know, the entire country was affected by the pandemic, and that does not, exclude Virginia, Maryland, or DC. And DC, again, we are continuing to recover and utilize all resources and relief opportunities that have been provided to us by Mayor Bowser to continue to move forward.
And before the pandemic, your office, obviously before you were in this position, had testified that it was forging new relationships with agencies like Destination DC to help promote new and legacy businesses within the nighttime economy, which is a very important priority for the committee. Talk about, to your knowledge, if any progress has been achieved in this endeavor.
Yeah, so during the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, we've had during listening tours, it's been included, I'd say over 100 touches, one which includes Destination DC. And just to give an example, we've had a great conversation with their executive committee and the CEO, and we were able to put the Gal Hispanic Theater in touch with them for them to help promote their performing arts and the theater, and also to help them navigate the best way to provide hospitality and, for example, hotel rooms for their local artists and also artists that they have brought in from Puerto Rico to be part of their plays.
Okay. And I'm going to turn now to, actually, let me get this last question in because I may not have a need for another round. In your performance oversight pre-hearing questions, you note on question 30 that the office and DMPID are partnering with the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership to conduct the Nightlife Impact Study 2.0. I was really interested in the first study that was conducted, but you all are working on 2.0 to measure the impact the pandemic has had on the D.C.'s nighttime economy. Provide me just some more details on where that is.
Yeah, so that study will be discussing the impact that COVID-19 has had on the nightlife and hospitality community. And we are excited to share this, and we'll be looking to launch this study in the near future.
Okay, all right. Well, keep me, the committee, apprised of where you are in launching that study. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Pinto for a round.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And hi, Director Vandernaut. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on your new role. And thanks for jumping in this wild year and helping some of our nightlife establishments with their recovery, which, as you know, they really need some attention and support. I'm hoping you can share a little bit more about your kind of longer term vision for the office, both in terms of how we're helping our nightlife industry and culture, nightlife culture of our city recover, but then also, in the next couple of years, kind of what your vision is.
Yeah, so again, referring back to the feedback from the Mayor's Office of Life and Culture listening tour, and also being in alignment with Mayor Bowser's priorities, my vision is to help restaurants and small businesses in the nightlife and hospitality industry recover from the pandemic and continue to provide them with the tools and guidance that they need. So I would like to call this the side-by-side initiatives. So first, Monk will work side-by-side with sister agencies to ensure that DC's restaurants and nightlife establishments are compliant. And second, we'll work side by side with former, current, and prospective industry workers to incentivize their return to work. And third, we'll work side by side with the nightlife ecosystem to help bring back the vibrancy of nightlife corridors.
Okay, and in terms of the second piece of bringing industry workers back to work, what are some of the initiatives you're focused on to partner with employers in this space to do so most expeditiously?
So we look at as far as partnering with employers to really engage the feedback that we've gotten to host a diverse series of educational programs that promote not only the job opportunities that are here in the nightlife and hospitality community in DC, but also very pertinent sources, services, and resources such as health insurance, looking to partner with the Department of Behavioral Science to provide mental health resources, as we all know that the community has just really gone through it for the past 2 years, and to ensure that we're able to help them with their mental health and their wellness as well, and also really get into the aspect of financial literacy resources for them as well. We'd love to continue to explore ways to provide childcare assistance as well. And also to even develop attractive incentive structures that would use DC government funding to help better recruit new hires for the nighttime industry.
Great, well, thank you so much. How are you partnering with other agencies to advertise some of the nightlife establishments and get our residents or visitors to support our local businesses? Do you do any partnerships with Destination DC or Events DC or others to attract people to visit our nightlife establishments?
So we are very excited to continue to work with the bids to create a Welcome Back to DC campaign. And also, as I mentioned in the testimony, that we'll be hosting the Responsible Hospitality Institute Sociable City Summit here in April to really highlight DC's social economic recovery and revitalization. And this is an amazing opportunity for not just the residents, but for visitors across the country to come to DC and experience our nightlife and culture, and to really, again, discuss the best practices of social economy and how everybody is continuing to recover from this pandemic. So we're really excited about that. And that also falls during cherry blossom time. So it'll be a very busy time. We've also been working on partnering with various festivals that have been coming back for the first time since the recovery, and really working to amplify their events, as well as really just working, continuing to engage Destination DC and connecting the dots for our constituents to help them promote their events. For example, as I mentioned, the Gal Hispanic Theater and their upcoming plays, especially because they have really invested into their work, and they've included, as I mentioned, our actors and actresses from Puerto Rico.
I was actually just at the opening night of that performance at
Oh, I must have missed you because I was definitely there too.
Oh, bummer. Yeah, it was an amazing performance. And I'm thrilled to hear about the Responsible Hospitality Institute. I was actually going to ask you about that next, and a little bit more about what the kind of plan is. What are the dates for that event? What's in the pipeline?
Yeah, sure. So for the Responsible Hospitality Institute, the Sociable City Summit, it will be here in DC from April 1st to 3rd. And we've been in contact with various government agencies and bid directors and Main Street directors, as well as key constituents that are part of the cultural community as well, to again highlight DC's economy, both nightlife and cultural aspect of it. And also to really discuss the nightlife recovery efforts here in DC, discuss public safety, and again, really addressing the diversity that DC has to offer, as well as outdoor dining as well.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sorry to end on, not that it's a bad note, but a different note, but just I was speaking to Director Musali a little bit about community input for some new restaurants, and curious how the Office of Nightlife and Culture engages with residents or ANC commissioners, particularly if an establishment is violating a settlement agreement or is setting up in more of a residential neighborhood that is leading to more complaints or concerns from neighbors.
Yes, so as one of the main initiatives for the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, that is to work with not just the businesses, but the residents, particularly that live close to the nightlife establishments, and to really moving forward to continue to promote constructive dialogue and promoting conflict resolution services to address the concerns that impact not just the nightlife ecosystem and the businesses and staff, but also those neighbors that live near the establishments based off of the quality of life concerns that they have as well. So really just to, work on the dialogue to create collaborative discussions that are, mutually respectful and that where both voices are able to address their concerns and be heard.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Hopefully see you soon. And thank you, Chairman McDuffie, for a good, productive day.
And thank you, Councilmember Pinto, for being with us for today. And thank you, Director Vandenat, for providing testimony here. I don't have any other questions I'd like to ask. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the record before we adjourn today's hearing?
I'd just like to say thank you so much to you both for taking the time to speak with me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about the Mayor's Office of Nightlife Cultures, past, present, and future.
Well, thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You do the same.
Thank you.
It's fitting that we are ending on almost nighttime with there. This marks the end of today's performance oversight hearing. The committee will convene again at 9 a.m. on Thursday, March 3rd to discuss the performance of the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, as well as the Office of Lottery and Gaming. Members of the public have until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, March 2nd to sign up with the committee to testify. The time is now 6:22 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you to the team for everything today too.
Great. Thank you. Good night.